One night, one decision, one photograph that destroyed everything. Evan Carter did nothing wrong. He simply helped his drunk CEO get home safely. By morning, he was the villain in a scandal he didn't create, facing a trial by rumor that convicted him without evidence. His career shattered, his reputation burned, his silence mistaken for guilt. But security cameras don't lie, and the truth was about to explode in ways no one expected. Stay with me until the end of this story. If you enjoy it, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The Sterling and Cross Anniversary Gala had devolved into expensive chaos. Evan Carter stood near the service entrance of the Grand Meridian Ballroom, hands clasped behind his back, watching 300 of the city's most powerful executives celebrate 20 years of corporate dominance with the kind of reckless abandon that only came from open bars and unchecked egos. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across designer gowns and tailored suits. Champagne flutes clinked with performative frequency. Laughter rose and fell in waves that had nothing to do with genuine joy and everything to do with professional networking. Evan had been a corporate driver for Sterling and Cross for 4 years. In that time, he'd learned to be invisible, a skill that served him well in a world where people like him were furniture with pulses. He was 32, average height, with the kind of unremarkable features that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. Brown hair kept short and neat, gray suit that fit well enough not to draw attention, posture that suggested competence without confidence. He was good at his job, punctual, discreet, forgettable. Carter, Thomas Vickers, the head of transportation services, appeared at his elbow with a clipboard and the perpetually harried expression of a man managing chaos. "I need you on standby. Ms. Whitmore's been drinking, and her regular driver called in sick." Evan's stomach tightened imperceptibly. "Understood. She'll probably want to leave in an hour or so. Wait in the executive lounge. Don't make yourself obvious." "Never do." Vickers nodded and disappeared back into the crowd, already fielding another crisis on his headset. Evan made his way through the service corridors to the executive lounge, a private area adjacent to the main ballroom where senior leadership could retreat when the performance of celebration became exhausting. The room was all leather furniture and dark wood paneling, designed to communicate power through aggressive minimalism. He settled into a chair near the door and waited. Lena Whitmore was a legend at Sterling and Cross. At 41, she was the youngest CEO in the company's history and one of the few women to break through the marble ceiling of corporate finance. She'd built her reputation on razor-sharp intelligence, ruthless efficiency, and an emotional distance that made her simultaneously respected and feared. Evan had driven her perhaps a dozen times over the years. She'd never once acknowledged his presence beyond the bare minimum required by social contract. Carter residence. Office. "Good evening, Miss Whitmore." Never small talk, never eye contact that lasted longer than professional necessity. She existed in a different atmospheric layer than people like him, and both of them understood that distinction without ever discussing it. An hour became 90 minutes. Through the lounge windows, Evan watched the party reach its apex, that dangerous point where inhibition collapsed, and tomorrow's regrets began taking shape. A senior VP knocked over a champagne tower. 2 department heads argued loudly about market projections, their disagreement seconds from becoming physical. Someone's wife threw a clutch purse at someone's mistress. Typical Friday night for the executive class. At 11:47 p.m., the lounge door opened. Lena Whitmore stumbled through it. Evan stood immediately, professional instinct overriding surprise. She was wearing an emerald gown that probably cost more than his car, her dark hair escaping from its elegant updo in ways that suggested she'd been running her hands through it. Her eyes, normally sharp enough to cut glass, were unfocused and glassy. "Ms. Whitmore." Evan kept his voice level, neutral. "I'm your driver this evening." She stared at him for a long moment, processing information with the delayed response of serious intoxication. "I know you." "Yes, ma'am, Evan Carter. I'll be taking you home tonight." "Home?" She laughed, the sound bitter and unsteady. "That's optimistic." She took 3 steps into the room and her heel caught the edge of a Persian rug. Evan moved without thinking, catching her elbow before she pitched forward. She was lighter than he expected. Her weight momentarily transferred entirely to his supporting arm. "Easy," he said quietly. "Let's get you sitting down." "I don't need—" She tried to pull away and nearly fell again. "God damn it!" "Miss Whitmore, please, just for a moment." He guided her to one of the leather couches, supporting her weight while maintaining the kind of impersonal contact a paramedic might use. She collapsed onto the cushions with none of her usual grace, one hand pressed to her forehead. "I'm fine," she said, to no one in particular. "Of course," Evan agreed, in the tone people used when polite fiction served everyone better than honest assessment. He stepped back, creating professional distance, and pulled out his phone. Protocol dictated he call Vickers, get instructions, probably hand this situation off to someone with more authority. But even as he unlocked the screen, he hesitated. Lena Whitmore was not fine. She was severely intoxicated, barely able to sit upright, and judging by the mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes, she'd been crying recently. The woman who ruled Sterling and Cross with absolute control was completely vulnerable, and every second she remained in this semi-public space increased the risk that someone would see her like this. Someone with a camera phone, someone with ambition and no loyalty, someone who would turn her moment of weakness into Monday morning currency. Evan made a decision. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, pocketing his phone, "I'm going to get the car and bring it to the executive entrance. We'll get you home safely. Can you wait here for 5 minutes?" She looked up at him, and for just a moment her eyes focused. "Why are you being kind to me?" The question caught him completely off guard. "I'm your driver, ma'am. It's my job to get you home safely." "No." She shook her head slowly. "Your job is to drive. You're being decent. That's different." Evan had no response to that. He simply nodded. 5 minutes. "Please stay here." He left before she could argue or spiral into whatever emotional state was lurking beneath her intoxication. The executive parking garage was nearly empty at this hour. Evan's assigned vehicle for the evening was a black Mercedes S-Class, the standard executive transport. He went through his pre-drive checklist with practiced efficiency, check mirrors, adjust seat, confirm fuel level, test lights. Routine created calm, and calm was what this situation required. 4 minutes later, he pulled up to the executive entrance. Lena was waiting exactly where he'd left her, though she'd clearly been struggling with her phone. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway, relief flickering across her face before professional armor attempted to reassert itself. "Let's go," she said, standing up too quickly and immediately regretting it. Evan was there in 2 steps, offering his arm. This time she took it without protest. The walk to the car was slow and careful. Lena leaned heavily against him, her coordination deteriorating with each step. Evan kept his grip firm but respectful, acutely aware that in this moment, the most powerful person at Sterling and Cross was entirely dependent on a man whose name she probably wouldn't remember tomorrow. He opened the rear passenger door and helped her inside. She collapsed onto the leather seat with a sound somewhere between a sigh and a groan. "Seatbelt," Evan reminded her gently. She fumbled with it ineffectively. After 10 seconds of watching her struggle, Evan made another decision that would change everything. He leaned into the car, keeping his movement slow and clearly visible, and reached across her to grab the seatbelt. "May I?" She nodded, eyes already closing. He pulled the belt across her body and clicked it into place, then stepped back and closed the door in one smooth motion. The drive to Lena's penthouse should have taken 25 minutes. Evan made it in 18, keeping his speed exactly at the limit, taking turns with extra care to avoid jostling his passenger. Through the rear view mirror, he could see her slumped against the window, either asleep or close to it. His phone buzzed. A text from Vickers. "Status?" Evan waited until they stopped at a red light before responding. "En route to Ms. Whitmore's residence. ETA 7 minutes. "Condition?" Evan paused, choosing his words carefully. "Passenger is secure. No issues." The light turned green. Evan put the phone away and focused on the road. Lena's building was in the city's most exclusive district, all glass and steel architecture that screamed wealth in the most sophisticated whisper money could buy. Evan pulled up to the private entrance, where a night doorman stood behind bulletproof glass looking professionally bored. In the rearview mirror, Lena hadn't moved. "Ms. Whitmore," Evan said, keeping his voice low and calm. "We're here." No response. He tried again, slightly louder. "Miss Whitmore, we've arrived at your building." Nothing. Evan's mind ran through options. He could get the doorman, create witnesses to whatever happened next. He could call Vickers again, make this someone else's problem. He could wake her up more aggressively, treat this like a simple transportation issue rather than a complex human situation. Instead, he got out of the car, walked around to the passenger side, and opened the door. Lena was deeply asleep now, her breathing slow and regular. The seatbelt had kept her from sliding completely sideways, but her position looked uncomfortable. "Ms. Whitmore," Evan touched her shoulder lightly. "You need to wake up now." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "What?" "We're at your building. Can you walk?" She tried to sit up and immediately fell back against the seat. "Maybe. Let me help you." Evan unbuckled her seatbelt and offered his hand. She took it, gripping harder than necessary as she pulled herself upright. Standing took 3 attempts. By the time she was vertical, she was leaning most of her weight against the car door. The doorman had noticed the situation and stepped outside, concern evident on his face. "Miss Whitmore, all right?" he asked, directing the question to Evan. "She's had a difficult evening," Evan said carefully. "I'm going to help her upstairs." The doorman hesitated, clearly weighing professional discretion against duty of care. "Want me to call someone?" "I think we're fine," Evan said. "But thank you." Lena mumbled something incomprehensible and nearly fell. Evan caught her, adjusting his position so she could lean against him more effectively. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you home." They made it through the lobby in a slow shuffle that probably looked worse than it was. The doorman held the elevator, his expression carefully neutral. Evan nodded his thanks. "Which floor?" the doorman asked. "Penthouse," Lena slurred, then immediately added, "He's okay. He works for me." The doorman looked at Evan, who kept his expression professionally blank. After a moment, the doorman nodded and pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator doors closed. Lena's weight sagged further against Evan's side. He adjusted his grip, supporting her more securely while trying to minimize physical contact. 32 floors passed in tense silence, broken only by the mechanical hum of ascension. The penthouse floor had a private hallway with exactly 1 door. Evan had never been inside any of the company executive residences, but he'd heard stories. 6,000 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows, views that made real estate agents cry with joy. "Keys?" Evan asked. Lena gestured vaguely at her clutch purse, which was hanging from her wrist by a delicate chain. Evan carefully retrieved it, opened it, and found a key card among the expensive clutter of her life. Designer lipstick, a phone with a cracked screen, breath mints, a business card with someone's personal number written on it. The door clicked open. Evan had been prepared for opulence. He wasn't prepared for emptiness. The penthouse was stunning. That much was undeniable. Polished hardwood floors, modern furniture in shades of gray and white, art that was probably worth more than he'd earn in a decade. But it felt abandoned. No personal photos. No scattered belongings suggesting someone actually lived here. No warmth or character or evidence of a life beyond work. It was a showroom, not a home. "Bedroom?" Evan asked. Lena pointed down a hallway with the kind of imprecision that confirmed she was operating on muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Evan helped her through the vast living space, past a kitchen that looked like it had never been used for actual cooking, down a hallway lined with abstract paintings. The bedroom was at the end, enormous, dominated by a king-sized bed with hotel white linens. He guided Lena to the bed and helped her sit down on the edge. She immediately slumped forward, barely catching herself with her hands. "Okay," Evan said, more to himself than to her. "Let's get you situated." He pulled back the comforter and arranged the pillows. Lena watched him with glassy eyes, her expression cycling through confusion, sadness, and something that might have been gratitude. "Lie down," Evan said gently. "You need to sleep this off." She complied without argument, rolling onto her side with the graceless collapse of someone whose body had stopped taking instructions from her brain. Evan pulled the comforter over her, making sure she was on her side in case she got sick. "Water," he said, spotting a bathroom through an adjacent door. "Stay there." He returned 30 seconds later with a glass of water and 2 aspirin from her medicine cabinet. He set both on the nightstand within easy reach. Lena was already half asleep, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of unconsciousness. Evan stood there for a moment, watching her with the kind of careful attention medical professionals use with patients. She looked smaller like this, more human, less like the corporate titan who could destroy careers with a signature, and more like someone who was deeply, profoundly alone. He should leave. His job was done. She was home, safe, positioned correctly in case of nausea. The water was within reach. There was nothing else for him to do here, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she'd asked him why he was being kind. Maybe it was the absolute emptiness of her supposedly enviable life. Maybe it was simple human decency recognizing another person's vulnerability and responding the way decent people should. Evan walked back to the living room and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city lights. The clock on the wall read 12:43 a.m. He pulled out his phone and texted Vickers, "Ms. Whitmore delivered safely to residence, heading home now." The response came back immediately. "Good work. See you Monday." Evan stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he looked back toward the bedroom hallway. Then he made the decision that would destroy his life. He wasn't leaving. Not because of anything inappropriate. Not because of any agenda or hope or foolish romantic notion. He was staying because Lena Whitmore was dangerously intoxicated, alone. And if something went wrong in the next few hours, if she got sick, if she fell, if any of a dozen medical complications arose, there would be no one here to help her. She was human. She was vulnerable. She deserved someone watching out for her, even if she'd never know it happened. Evan settled onto the living room couch, set an alarm on his phone for every hour, and prepared for a long night of making sure his boss didn't die from alcohol poisoning. It was the right thing to do. It was also the worst mistake of his life. At 2:17 a.m., Evan's hourly alarm went off. He checked on Lena, still sleeping, breathing normally, positioned safely. He returned to the couch. At 3:17 a.m., same routine, no changes. At 4:17 a.m., he found her awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her head in her hands. "Miss Whitmore?" Evan stayed in the doorway, maintaining distance. "Are you all right?" She looked up and for a moment didn't seem to recognize him. Then clarity flickered across her face. "What are you doing here?" "Making sure you were okay. You were very intoxicated. I didn't want to leave you alone." She stared at him for a long moment. "You stayed? All night?" It seemed prudent. "That's..." She paused, processing. "That's incredibly inappropriate." "I slept on your couch, ma'am. I checked on you periodically to ensure you were breathing normally and positioned safely. I never entered this room beyond placing water on your nightstand. I can leave now if you'd like." Lena rubbed her eyes, smudging what remained of her makeup. "No, thank you. That was thoughtful." "You're welcome. But you should go, before..." She gestured vaguely at the windows where dawn was starting to lighten the sky. "Before people see." Evan understood immediately. A male employee leaving his female CEO's penthouse at dawn would generate exactly the kind of speculation neither of them needed. "Of course," he said. "Is there anything you need before I leave?" "No, I'm fine now. Thank you, Carter." "Evan." She blinked. "What?" "My name. It's Evan. If you're going to thank me, you should probably know it." Something shifted in her expression, surprise maybe, or recognition that she'd just been gently called out for 4 years of treating him like sentient furniture. "Thank you, Evan." He nodded and turned to leave. "Wait." Evan stopped, looking back. Lena stood up carefully, testing her balance. She was still wearing the emerald gown, now wrinkled and askew. Her hair was a disaster. Her makeup made her look like a beautiful ghost, but her eyes were clear now, focused with the same intensity that made her formidable in boardrooms. "What you did tonight," she said slowly, "staying, making sure I was safe. That was... No one has done something like that for me in a very long time. Anyone decent would have done the same." "No." Her voice was firm. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have taken a photo, spread it around, turned my weakness into their advantage. You didn't. Evan had no response to that. In his world, basic human decency wasn't extraordinary. In hers, apparently, it was revolutionary. I'll remember this, Lena said quietly. You don't need to, ma'am. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing much more than your job, and I will remember. Evan nodded once more and left, acutely aware that he'd just crossed some invisible line between professional and personal, between employee and something else. Something undefined and potentially dangerous. He took the service elevator down to avoid the main lobby. The early morning streets were nearly empty as he walked the 6 blocks to where he'd parked the Mercedes in a company garage. His phone showed 5:03 a.m. In 3 hours, his daughter Emma would be waking up in his ex-wife's apartment across town, expecting him to pick her up for their Saturday together. Evan started the car and began the drive home, already mentally cataloging everything he needed to do. Return the Mercedes to the company garage, shower, change clothes, grab coffee, pick up Emma, pretend that tonight had been just another shift in just another week of just another unremarkable life. He didn't know that behind him, in the penthouse he'd just left, Lena Whitmore was standing at her window watching the sunrise, thinking about kindness and loneliness and the strange intersection of the two. He didn't know that in approximately 8 hours, someone would discover security footage of him helping her into the car. He didn't know that by Monday morning, his entire life would be on fire. All he knew was that he'd done the right thing, and that had to be enough. It wasn't. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of ordinary magic that made Evan forget, for a few precious hours, that he'd spent the previous night in his CEO's penthouse. Emma was 7 years old, all wild curls and endless questions, and she threw herself into his arms the moment he knocked on his ex-wife's door with the force of a small, affectionate torpedo. Daddy, can we go to the Science Museum? Please? They have a new exhibit about volcanoes, and Mrs. Chen said it's so cool, and there's fake lava, and Emma, breathe, Evan laughed, catching her mid-leap. Yes, we can go to the museum. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind Emma, already dressed for whatever Saturday plans didn't include him. Their divorce had been finalized 2 years ago, amicable enough, if divorce could ever truly be amicable. She'd wanted someone with ambition, with drive, with prospects beyond being a corporate driver for the rest of his life. He'd wanted someone who understood that being present for your daughter mattered more than climbing ladders that led nowhere meaningful. They'd both gotten what they wanted, which was why they could now exchange polite smiles while coordinating custody schedules. She's been talking about volcanoes all week, Sarah said, handing him Emma's backpack. Good luck. I've survived worse. Sarah's expression flickered with something, concern maybe, or curiosity. You look tired. Late night, company event. They're working you too hard. Evan shrugged, not wanting to explain that his exhaustion had nothing to do with being overworked and everything to do with making choices that felt right in the moment, but complicated in retrospect. I'm fine. We'll have her back by 6? Perfect. Emma was already pulling him toward the car, launching into a detailed explanation of volcanic rock formations that she'd clearly memorized from educational videos. Evan let her words wash over him, grateful for the normalcy, for this pocket of his life that remained uncomplicated and pure. They spent 5 hours at the museum. Emma dragged him through every exhibit twice, asked 800 questions, and charmed a museum docent into giving her a behind-the-scenes tour of the mineral collection. Evan took photos, bought overpriced ice cream from the cafe, and remembered why he'd chosen the life he had, why he'd never wanted the promotions, or the politics, or the corner offices that required sacrificing this kind of Saturday. By the time he dropped Emma back at Sarah's apartment, he was exhausted in the best possible way. Love you, Daddy, Emma said, hugging him tight enough to crack ribs. Love you too, volcano girl. He drove home to his small apartment in a neighborhood that was trying very hard to gentrify and mostly failing. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, bathroom with temperamental plumbing, but it was his. Quiet. Simple. Enough. Evan heated up leftover Chinese food, turned on a basketball game he didn't really care about, and tried not to think about Lena Whitmore standing in her empty penthouse thanking him for basic human decency, like it was some kind of miracle. Sunday passed in similar unremarkable fashion: laundry, groceries, A call from his mother that lasted 45 minutes and covered everything from his sister's new job to whether he was eating enough vegetables. He went to bed early, alarm set for 5:30 a.m., mentally preparing for another week of being professionally invisible. He had no idea that while he was sleeping, his entire world was being dismantled by people he'd never met. Monday morning started normally. Evan arrived at the Sterling and Cross garage at 6:15 a.m., did his vehicle inspection, checked his assignment schedule. He was on standby until 9:00 a.m., then had an airport run for a visiting board member. Standard Monday. The first sign that something was wrong came at 7:43 a.m. Marcus Chen, another driver who'd worked at Sterling and Cross for almost a decade, walked past Evan's usual spot in the break room without making eye contact. Not unusual. Marcus wasn't particularly social before coffee, but when Evan said good morning, Marcus literally pretended not to hear him. Weird, but not alarming. The second sign came 15 minutes later when Evan went to grab his assignment tablet from the dispatch office. Jennifer Ross, the dispatcher who normally greeted everyone with aggressive cheerfulness, regardless of how early it was, looked up when he entered, and her smile died instantly. "Carter," she said, her voice carefully neutral in a way that suggested significant effort. "Morning, Jen. Just grabbing my tablet." She slid it across the desk without comment, then immediately turned back to her computer screen with the kind of deliberate focus that communicated dismissal. Evan took the tablet and left, unease starting to curl in his stomach. The third sign was impossible to miss. He walked into the main garage bay where 6 other drivers were doing their morning prep, and the conversation stopped. Completely. Mid-sentence silence that stretched awkwardly as everyone suddenly became very interested in their vehicle inspections. Evan stopped walking. "What's going on?" No one answered. "Seriously, what happened?" Marcus finally looked at him, and his expression was a complicated mix of pity and disgust. "You really don't know?" "Don't know what?" "Check your phone, man." Evan pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls from Vickers, 7 unread text messages, 12 emails, several flagged as urgent, and 1 notification from the company's internal communication platform. Mandatory HR meeting, Evan Carter, 9:00 a.m. Report immediately. His chest tightened. "What the hell?" "You should probably look at the photo first," Marcus said quietly. "What photo?" Instead of answering, Marcus pulled out his own phone, tapped a few times, and turned the screen toward Evan. The photo was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, probably with a phone camera zoomed in too far. But it was unmistakably Evan, leaning into the back of a car, his arms clearly inside the vehicle. The angle made it look very bad. "That's from Friday night," Evan said slowly, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. "I was helping Miss Whitmore with her seatbelt. She was intoxicated and couldn't—" "Is there a photo of you leaving her building at 5 in the morning?" Marcus interrupted. Evan's blood turned to ice. "How do you—" "Building security footage. Someone leaked it to the company chat over the weekend." Marcus shook his head. "Man, what were you thinking?" "I wasn't— It's not what it looks like." "It never is." The other drivers were watching now, their expressions ranging from judgmental to fascinated. Evan felt like he was suffocating, like the garage had suddenly lost all its oxygen. "I need to talk to Vickers," he said. "Good luck with that," someone muttered. Evan walked out of the garage on legs that felt disconnected from his body. His hands were shaking. The phone felt heavy and foreign in his grip. He pulled up the company chat application and immediately wished he hadn't. The photo Marcus had shown him was there, posted by someone named Derek Hutchins from the events management team. Below it, a caption. "Guess we know how some people get ahead at S&C." The comments were worse. "Always knew something was off about that guy." "CEO's personal driver. Bet that pays well." "This is disgusting. Someone should report this to HR. Pretty sure sleeping with your boss violates like 50 company policies." "Not technically his boss. Different departments. Still gross, though." The thread went on for hundreds of comments, each one piling onto the previous, building a narrative that had nothing to do with reality and everything to do with collective willingness to believe the worst about people. Evan's vision tunneled. He leaned against the corridor wall, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to understand how helping someone get home safely had turned into this. His phone rang. Vickers. "Carter, my office, now." The line went dead. Thomas Vickers' office was on the third floor of the administrative building, a space that managed to be both cluttered and impersonal. Evan had been inside exactly twice before, once when he was hired, once when he'd received a commendation for 500 consecutive days without a vehicle incident. This visit felt different. Vickers was standing behind his desk when Evan entered, his expression grim. Next to him stood Patricia Webb from Human Resources, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of face that suggested she'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. "Sit down, Carter," Vickers said. Evan sat. His hands were still shaking, so he gripped the arms of the chair to hide it. Patricia opened a folder and laid a printed copy of the photo on the desk. "Do you know what this is?" "That's me helping Ms. Whitmore into a vehicle Friday night. She was intoxicated and couldn't manage her seatbelt." "And this?" Patricia laid down a second photo, security footage showing Evan entering Lena's building, supporting her weight as she leaned against him. "I was making sure she got home safely." "And this?" A third photo, Evan exiting the building alone at dawn. "I stayed to ensure she was all right. She was severely intoxicated. I was concerned about alcohol poisoning." Patricia's expression didn't change. "You stayed in Ms. Whitmore's residence overnight. On her couch, checking on her periodically. Without her permission. She was unconscious." "Which makes it worse, Mr. Carter, not better." Evan felt the floor dropping out from under him. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was trying to help." Vickers sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. "Evan, I've known you for 4 years. You've been reliable, professional, never caused problems. But this," he gestured at the photos, "this looks really bad." "It looks bad because someone's deliberately making it look bad. The full context." "The full context doesn't matter," Patricia interrupted. "What matters is perception. What matters is that you, a male employee, spent the night in your female superior's residence without explicit permission, proper documentation, or witnesses to corroborate your version of events. I can explain everything that happened. To whom? To the 300 employees who've already seen these photos? To the board members who are asking questions about company culture? To the press, when they inevitably pick this up?" Evan stared at her, understanding crystallizing with horrible clarity. "You've already decided I'm guilty." "We haven't decided anything," Vickers said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "But we need to conduct a full investigation. And during that investigation, you're suspended." "Suspended. With pay," Patricia added, as if that made it better. "Effective immediately. You'll surrender your company credentials, vehicle access, and building passes. You are not to contact Ms. Whitmore or attempt to influence the investigation in any way. Do you understand?" "This is insane. I did nothing wrong." "Then the investigation will clear you," Patricia said, with the kind of false reassurance that meant she expected exactly the opposite outcome. "In the meantime, we need to protect the company's reputation and ensure a fair process." "Fair process?" Evan laughed, the sound bitter. "Everyone's already convicted me. I saw the comments. The investigation is just theater." "That's enough, Carter." Vickers' voice had gone hard. "You're not helping yourself." Evan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Can I at least tell you what actually happened? The whole story, not just these photos stripped of context?" Patricia and Vickers exchanged a look. "You'll have the opportunity to provide a statement," Patricia said, "in writing, through proper channels, but right now we need you to leave the premises." "You're throwing me out." "We're following protocol." Evan pulled his company ID from his wallet, his building pass from his pocket, and his vehicle access card from his phone case. He laid them on the desk with exaggerated care, each one a small surrender. "Anything else you need from me?" he asked. "We'll be in touch," Patricia said. Evan turned and walked out, closing the door behind him with the kind of control that took everything he had. The corridor outside was empty, but he could feel eyes watching from every office, every cubicle, every corner where people were pretending to work while actually monitoring the drama unfolding in their midst. He made it to the parking garage before the full weight of what had just happened crashed down on him, suspended, under investigation. Guilty by photograph, by narrative, by collective decision that the truth was less interesting than the scandal. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. You disgust me. Hope you lose everything. Then another. How much did she pay you to keep quiet? Another. Predator. Evan turned off his phone and drove home in silence that felt like drowning. The next 3 days were a masterclass in professional destruction. By Tuesday morning, the story had spread beyond Sterling and Cross. Someone, probably multiple someones, had leaked it to industry gossip blogs, employment forums, social media platforms where people who'd never met Evan felt entitled to judge every decision he'd ever made. The narrative was simple and damning. Ambitious driver seduces powerful CEO, stays overnight in her penthouse, tries to leverage the situation for career advancement. The photos were proof. The timeline was suspicious. His silence was admission of guilt. Never mind that he hadn't said anything because no one had asked him for his version of events. Never mind that he'd actively avoided seeking any advantage from that night. Never mind that every decision he'd made had been about protecting Lena's dignity, not exploiting her vulnerability. None of that fit the story people wanted to tell. Evan stopped reading the comments after the first 100. They were variations on the same theme: disgust, condemnation, performative outrage from people who'd never faced a similar situation and couldn't imagine choosing integrity over self-preservation. His phone rang constantly. Blocked numbers, unknown callers, reporters who'd somehow gotten his personal information. He stopped answering. The voicemail box filled up and he stopped checking it. Sarah called on Wednesday. Evan, what the hell is happening? Emma came home from school crying because some kid's parents were talking about you. What is this photo everyone's sharing? He explained. The whole story, start to finish, every detail he could remember. Sarah was silent for a long moment. You really just stayed to make sure she was okay? Yes. You didn't... No, Sarah, I would never... I know. Her voice softened. I know you wouldn't. But Evan, this looks really bad. Emma's upset. Other parents are asking questions. I need to know how to handle this. Tell them the truth. I don't think people care about the truth right now. She was right. They didn't. Thursday brought a new development. Patricia Webb called with an update on the investigation. We've interviewed several witnesses from the gala, she said, her voice professionally neutral. Multiple people confirmed that Ms. Whitmore was severely intoxicated. The bartender remembers serving her at least 6 drinks over the course of the evening. So that corroborates my story. It corroborates that she was drunk. It doesn't explain your decision to stay in her residence overnight. I already explained that, multiple times. Yes. And we're taking your statement into consideration. However, we've also been trying to contact Ms. Whitmore for her version of events, and she's been unavailable. Evan's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means she hasn't responded to our request for an interview. Her assistant says she's dealing with urgent business matters and will address this when her schedule permits. So she's just not defending me? She's not commenting at all. Which leaves us with your statement against considerable circumstantial evidence and significant concerns about professional conduct. Evan closed his eyes. When will you make a decision? The investigation remains ongoing. We'll notify you when we reach a conclusion. The call ended. Evan sat in his apartment, surrounded by silence that felt accusatory, and tried to understand why Lena wasn't saying anything. She'd been there. She knew what happened. One statement from her could end this entire nightmare, confirm that he'd acted appropriately, that she'd asked him to stay, that nothing inappropriate had occurred. But she was silent, and her silence was destroying him. Friday morning arrived with an email from Human Resources. Investigation update. Based on preliminary findings and ongoing concerns about workplace conduct, your suspension has been extended indefinitely. We will notify you when the investigation concludes. Please continue to refrain from contacting Ms. Whitmore or discussing this matter publicly. Evan read the email 3 times, each reading making it feel more surreal. Indefinitely. They weren't even pretending this would be resolved quickly. He opened his laptop and started looking at job listings, even though he knew his chances of getting hired anywhere were essentially 0. A quick Google search of his name now brought up the scandal as the top result. Any HR department doing basic due diligence would find the photos, the accusations, the carefully worded articles that avoided direct claims while heavily implying guilt. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His daughter was being affected at school, all because he'd chosen to make sure another human being got home safely. The doorbell rang. Evan almost didn't answer it. He'd stopped opening the door 3 days ago when reporters had started showing up. But when he checked the peephole, he saw Marcus Chen standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable and determined in equal measure. Evan opened the door. "Marcus? Can I come in?" Evan stepped aside. Marcus entered slowly, taking in the apartment with the kind of careful observation that suggested he was gathering information for some purpose Evan couldn't yet identify. "You look terrible," Marcus said. "Thanks. I'm not here to make you feel worse. I wanted to tell you something." Evan waited. Marcus pulled out his phone and navigated to the company chat. The original photo, the one of you at the car, it was posted by Derek Hutchins. "You know him?" "Events management. Never spoken to him directly." "Right. Well, Derek deleted his account yesterday. Just completely scrubbed his presence from the company systems." "Why would he do that?" "Because someone pointed out that the metadata on the photo shows it was taken from an unusual angle, from above, probably from a building across the street. And there's nothing across from the Grand Meridian except office buildings that would have been locked at that hour." Evan's mind started working faster. "So, how did he get it?" "Exactly. How did someone from events management, who wasn't even working the gala, get security-style footage from a locked building at midnight?" Marcus paused. "People are starting to ask questions about who set this whole thing up." "You think this was planned?" "I think someone wanted you to look bad, or wanted Ms. Whitmore to look bad, or both." Marcus shook his head. "I don't know the why, but the how is starting to smell wrong." Evan sat down heavily on his couch. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. I'm still suspended. The photos are still out there. The damage is done." "Maybe, but maybe the truth still matters to someone." "Who?" "Everyone's already made up their minds." Marcus moved toward the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I don't think you did anything wrong. I've known you for years. You're the most straight-laced, boring, by-the-book guy in the whole department. If you say you stayed on her couch to make sure she didn't choke on her own vomit, I believe you." "Thanks," Evan said quietly, "but you need to fight this. Sitting here waiting for the investigation to clear you, that's not going to work. They're not looking for truth. They're looking for liability management." "What am I supposed to do?" "I don't know, but doing nothing definitely isn't it." Marcus left. Evan sat alone in his apartment staring at nothing, thinking about everything. Marcus was right, waiting for vindication from people who'd already decided his guilt was naive at best, suicidal at worst. But what could he actually do? He had no power, no platform, no voice that anyone would listen to. The only person who could change this narrative was Lena Whitmore. And she'd chosen silence. The weekend crawled past with the kind of suffocating slowness that turned hours into geological epochs. Evan avoided social media, ignored his email, and tried to pretend his life wasn't imploding in real time. Emma's scheduled Saturday visit had been postponed. Sarah's decision, delivered via text message with an apologetic tone that somehow made it worse. "Let's wait until things settle down. She's getting questions at school. I think some distance would be better right now." Distance. From his own daughter. Because of a photograph and a narrative he couldn't control. Sunday evening, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up on the fourth ring. "Mr. Carter?" A woman's voice, professional and unfamiliar. "Speaking." "This is Amanda Cross, Ms. Whitmore's executive assistant. Ms. Whitmore would like to speak with you. Are you available?" Evan's heart stopped. "When?" "Now. Please hold." There was a click, brief silence, and then Lena's voice came through the line. Controlled, measured, and carrying an undercurrent of something Evan couldn't quite identify. "Evan, thank you for taking my call." "Ms. Whitmore, I imagine you have questions." "That's an understatement." A pause. "I'm sorry for all of this, for my silence. You deserved better." Evan closed his eyes. Then why? You could have stopped this with one statement, one confirmation that nothing inappropriate happened. Why didn't you? Because I was advised not to. Legal counsel, PR consultants, board members, everyone said the same thing. Stay quiet. Let HR handle it. Don't make statements that could be used against the company later. Don't create liability. So you threw me to the wolves to protect the company? Yes. Her voice was quiet but steady. I did exactly that, and I need you to know that I hate myself for it. Evan didn't know what to say to that. I'm calling now because I can't stay silent anymore, Lena continued. I've watched what they're doing to you. I've seen the comments, the accusations, the way they've destroyed your reputation over something that was my fault, not yours. And I'm done pretending that protecting corporate interests matters more than protecting someone who protected me. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling an emergency all-staff meeting. I'm going to show everyone the full security footage from my building, footage that shows exactly what happened that night. Every angle, every moment, the complete truth. Evan's breath caught. That'll end the investigation. That'll end more than the investigation. It'll expose everyone who chose rumor over reality, punishment over process. It's going to get ugly. You don't have to do this. Yes, Lena said firmly. I do. You stayed that night because you're a good person who saw someone in trouble and refused to walk away. The least I can do is show the same integrity you showed me. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get worse before it gets better. But Evan? Yes? It will get better. I promise you that. The call ended. Evan sat in the dark, holding his phone, feeling something like hope for the first time in a week. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the truth would finally matter. Tomorrow, maybe, his life could start recovering from the damage that silence had caused. He had no idea that Lena's version of getting ugly was a spectacular understatement. Monday morning arrived like a reckoning. Evan woke at 5 o'clock a.m. despite having no reason to wake early anymore, despite having nowhere to go and no job waiting for him. Habit ran deeper than circumstance, apparently. He made coffee in his small kitchen, hands steady now in a way they hadn't been for days, and tried not to think about what was coming. Lena had said she would tell the truth, show the footage, end this nightmare with facts that couldn't be disputed or twisted. But Evan had learned over the past week that truth was a fragile thing, easily broken, quickly buried, often irrelevant in the face of compelling fiction. He hoped she was right. He hoped evidence would matter. He hoped that showing people what actually happened would undo the damage that photographs and assumptions had caused. But hope felt dangerous. Hope meant vulnerability. Hope meant believing that justice existed in a world that had spent 7 days proving otherwise. At 8:47 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Emergency all-staff meeting announced. 10 a.m. Attendance mandatory. Everyone's losing their minds. Evan stared at the message. She was really doing it. Lena was actually going through with confronting the entire company, exposing the truth, putting herself on the line to clear his name. Another text arrived. Someone said Whitmore looked furious in the announcement email. Like nuclear-level furious. This is going to be insane. Evan set his phone down and walked to his window, looking out at the city that had spent a week destroying him. Somewhere out there, 300 Sterling and Cross employees were heading into the office, gossiping about the emergency meeting, speculating about what would happen, completely unaware that their comfortable narrative was about to explode. He wondered if any of them would feel ashamed when they learned the truth. He doubted it. Shame required accountability, and people were remarkably good at avoiding both. At 9:30 a.m., Evan's phone rang. Patricia Webb. He almost didn't answer, then realized that avoiding HR at this point was pointless. Hello? Mr. Carter, I'm calling to inform you that you're required to attend this morning's all-staff meeting. I'm suspended. I'm not allowed on company property. Your suspension is being temporarily lifted for this meeting. Please arrive at the main auditorium by 9:50. Security will be notified to grant you access. Why do you need me there? Patricia's voice took on an edge. Ms. Whitmore requested your presence specifically. That's all I can tell you. The call ended before Evan could respond. He stood frozen in his apartment for 30 seconds, mind racing through implications. Lena wanted him there, not just clearing his name in absentia, but forcing everyone to confront him directly, to see him as a real person rather than an abstract scandal. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. Evan showered, shaved, and dressed in the same gray suit he'd worn the night of the gala, the one that made him invisible, professional, unremarkable. He drove to Sterling and Cross for the first time in a week, pulling into the parking garage with credentials that had been temporarily reactivated, feeling like he was driving into enemy territory. The building felt different. Or maybe he felt different. Either way, walking through the lobby toward the main auditorium was like moving through hostile landscape where every face was potentially an enemy. Security waved him through without comment, their expressions carefully neutral. Evan made his way down the corridor toward the auditorium, aware of people staring, whispering, pulling out phones to text updates to colleagues who hadn't seen him yet. He pushed through the auditorium doors at 9:52 a.m. The space could hold 400 people, and today it was nearly full. Every seat occupied, people standing along the walls, everyone's attention fixed on the empty stage at the front, where a podium and large projection screen waited. The energy in the room was electric. Anticipation mixed with anxiety, mixed with the particular kind of excitement that came from knowing you were about to witness something significant. Evan spotted Marcus near the back and started to head in that direction, but a security guard intercepted him. "Mr. Carter, please come with me." The guard led him not to the general seating, but to a side entrance that opened directly onto the stage. Evan's stomach dropped. "I'm supposed to be on stage?" Ms. Whitmore's instructions. They emerged into a small backstage area where Lena Whitmore stood reviewing notes on a tablet, her expression carved from granite. She looked up when Evan entered, and something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or determination reinforced. "Evan, thank you for coming. Thank you for— Did I have a choice?" "No, but I appreciate it anyway." She set down the tablet and faced him fully. "You to understand what's about to happen. I'm going to show them everything. The full security footage from my building, the camera angles from the gala, the timeline that proves exactly what you did and didn't do. I'm going to make them see the truth." "Okay. But I'm also going to make them face you. I need you visible on that stage while I show this footage because people are very good at abstracting away their cruelty when they can't see its target. I need them to look at you while they learn how badly they failed you." Evan's throat tightened. "That's going to be uncomfortable." "For them?" "Yes, that's the point." Lena's eyes were fierce. "You protected me when I was vulnerable. The least I can do is make the people who attacked you face what they've done." "You're angry." "I'm livid. I have spent a week watching good people destroy an innocent man because it was easier than asking questions or demanding evidence. I've watched HR conduct a sham investigation designed to protect the company rather than find truth. I've listened to board members tell me that your reputation is acceptable collateral damage for managing our liability. And I'm done pretending that's acceptable." Evan had never seen her like this. Raw fury barely contained beneath professional composure. It was intimidating and oddly comforting in equal measure. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "Sit on stage. Stay silent. Let me handle this. And when it's over, let me fix what my silence broke." Before Evan could respond, Amanda Cross appeared from the wings. "Ms. Whitmore, it's time." Lena nodded, then looked at Evan one more time. "Ready?" "No, but let's do it anyway." They walked onto the stage together. The auditorium fell silent instantly. 300 people watching, processing, trying to understand why their disgraced former employee was standing next to their CEO looking calm and professional, rather than ashamed and apologetic. Lena directed Evan to a chair positioned to the side of the podium, visible to the audience but not the focus of attention. He sat, keeping his posture straight, his hands folded in his lap, his expression neutral despite the fact that his heart was trying to break through his ribcage. Lena stepped to the podium, and the projection screen behind her lit up with the Sterling and Cross logo. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began, her voice carrying easily through the space, amplified by the auditorium's sound system. "I've called this meeting to address a situation that has consumed this company for the past week. A situation that has revealed some fundamental failures in how we operate, how we treat our employees, and how quickly we abandon our stated values when tested by circumstance." She paused, letting the words settle. 10 days ago, we held our anniversary gala. By all accounts, it was a successful event. Good attendance, positive energy, celebration of our accomplishments. Lena's expression hardened. It was also the night I drank far more than I should have, became severely intoxicated, and required assistance getting home safely. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Lena Whitmore did not make public admissions of weakness. She did not acknowledge vulnerability. Her doing so now was already breaking the expected script. Evan Carter, one of our corporate drivers, was assigned to drive me home that evening. What happened after that has been the subject of extensive speculation, rumor, and judgment based on incomplete information and deliberately misleading photographs. The screen behind her changed. The first photo appeared, the one showing Evan leaning into the car, the angle suggesting intimacy rather than assistance. This photograph has circulated widely. It appears to show Mr. Carter in a compromising position, but photographs lie when context is removed. Let me show you what actually happened. The screen shifted to video footage. Security camera angle from the Grand Meridian's executive entrance, timestamp clearly visible. The footage showed Lena stumbling through the door, barely able to stand, with Evan moving quickly to catch her before she fell. The audience watched in silence as he helped her to the car, opened the door, and carefully assisted her with the seatbelt that she was obviously too intoxicated to manage herself. The angle was different from the leaked photo. This angle showed restraint, professionalism, care. This angle showed a man doing his job with dignity and respect. As you can see, Lena continued, her voice cutting through the silence, Mr. Carter was helping me with basic safety protocols that I was too drunk to manage alone. There was nothing inappropriate about this interaction. The video continued. Evan closing the car door, walking around to the driver's side, pulling away from the hotel. The footage was mundane, ordinary, exactly what it should have been. The second photograph that circulated showed Mr. Carter helping me into my building. The screen changed again, showing new footage from the building's security system. Again, what was presented as evidence of wrongdoing was actually evidence of someone ensuring I got home safely, despite my complete inability to navigate even basic tasks like walking. The audience watched Lena lean heavily against Evan as they entered the building, saw the doorman's concerned expression, saw Evan's careful, respectful support that kept her upright without crossing any professional boundaries. The third photograph, the one that seemed to prove guilt beyond doubt, showed Mr. Carter leaving my building at dawn. Lena's voice grew harder. What that photograph didn't show was what happened during the hours between his arrival and departure. The screen split into multiple camera angles from inside Lena's building, lobby, elevator, hallway outside her penthouse. Evan helping her inside. Timestamp, 12:51 a.m. Then nothing for hours except occasional footage of Evan emerging from the penthouse, checking the hallway, returning inside. Mr. Carter stayed in my apartment overnight, Lena said bluntly. But not for the reasons many of you assumed. He stayed because I was dangerously intoxicated and he was concerned about medical complications. He stayed because leaving me alone in that condition would have been irresponsible. He stayed because it was the right thing to do. New footage appeared, this time from inside Lena's penthouse. Evan hadn't known there were cameras inside her apartment, but apparently she'd had them installed for security purposes. The footage showed him helping her to the bedroom, bringing her water, checking on her periodically through the night, sleeping on the couch in clothes he never removed. The timestamps documented everything. His arrival, his consistent checks, his departure at dawn. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing that suggested anything beyond one person ensuring another person's safety. The auditorium was silent except for the sound of the video playback. This, Lena said, her voice carrying absolute conviction, is what actually happened. Not the story you've been telling yourselves, not the scandal you've been enjoying, the truth. Boring, simple, decent truth. She let that hang in the air for a long moment before continuing. Now let me tell you what happened after these photographs were leaked. Mr. Carter was immediately subjected to investigation by HR. He was suspended without being given meaningful opportunity to defend himself. He was tried and convicted by company gossip, by social media commentary, by people who know nothing about him but felt entitled to destroy his reputation anyway. Lena's eyes swept the audience, and Evan saw people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I know many of you participated in this. I've seen the chat logs, the comment threads, the casual cruelty you directed at a colleague who had done nothing wrong. Some of you called him a predator. Some suggested he'd leveraged this situation for career advancement. Some of you made jokes about his integrity, his character, his worth as a human being. The discomfort in the room was palpable now. And while you were doing this, where was I? Lena's voice took on a bitter edge. I was silent. I was following advice from lawyers and PR consultants who told me that protecting the company's reputation mattered more than protecting the reputation of a man who had protected me. I was being a coward. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter but somehow more forceful. I called this meeting because I refused to be that person anymore. I refused to let corporate liability calculations matter more than basic human decency. And I refused to let what happened to Evan Carter stand as an acceptable outcome. Lena turned slightly, gesturing toward where Evan sat. This is Evan Carter. He is not a predator. He is not someone who exploited a vulnerable situation. He is a good man who made a difficult choice to prioritize another person's safety over his own convenience. And for that choice, he has been punished, humiliated, and nearly destroyed by people who should have known better. Evan felt 300 pairs of eyes on him. He kept his expression neutral, his posture steady, even though inside he was experiencing emotional whiplash that left him somewhere between vindicated and devastated. Effective immediately, Lena continued, Mr. Carter's suspension is lifted. The investigation is concluded with a finding of complete exoneration. His record will show no disciplinary action, no mark against his professional conduct, nothing that suggests he did anything other than exceed expectations in difficult circumstances. She looked directly at Patricia Webb, who was sitting in the front row looking like she'd just swallowed glass. Additionally, I'm ordering a full review of our HR investigation procedures, because what happened to Mr. Carter reveals systemic failures in how we handle accusations, how we evaluate evidence, and how we protect employees from mob mentality masquerading as corporate culture. Patricia's face flushed red, but she remained silent. Lena's attention shifted to the broader audience. I'm also instituting immediate disciplinary action against anyone who participated in spreading unverified information, making defamatory statements, or contributing to the hostile environment that Mr. Carter endured. If you posted in the company chat, if you shared the photos externally, if you made jokes at his expense, expect conversations with HR in the coming days. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. I want to be very clear about something, Lena said, her voice dropping to a register that somehow felt more dangerous than her earlier intensity. What happened to Evan Carter is not acceptable. It will never be acceptable, and it will not happen again at this company, not on my watch. She paused, then delivered the final strike. I'm also announcing the creation of a new position, Director of Ethics and Professional Standards. This role will report directly to me and will be responsible for ensuring that we live up to the values we claim to hold, that we treat employees with dignity, that we demand evidence before reaching conclusions, that we create a culture where doing the right thing is rewarded, not punished. Lena looked at Evan, and the smallest smile touched her lips. Mr. Carter, I'd like you to be the first person to hold this position, if you're willing to accept it. The auditorium erupted. Not with applause, there was some of that, scattered and uncertain, but with shock, confusion, voices rising in question and protest and disbelief. People turning to their neighbors, demanding to know if this was really happening, if Lena Whitmore had actually just promoted the man they'd spent a week destroying. Evan sat frozen, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. A promotion, not just vindication but elevation, not just clearing his name but giving him power, authority, a platform to ensure this never happened to anyone else. He stood slowly, aware that every eye in the room was tracking his movement, and walked to the podium where Lena waited. I accept, he said quietly, for her ears only. Good, she replied, then stepped aside so he could face the audience. Evan looked out at 300 people who had spent a week hating him, judging him, destroying him without evidence or hesitation. He saw guilt on some faces, defiance on others, confusion on most. He saw Marcus grinning like this was the best thing he'd ever witnessed. He saw Patricia Webb looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. He should have felt triumphant. He should have felt vindicated. Instead, he just felt tired. "I don't have a speech prepared," Evan said into the microphone. "I didn't know this was going to happen, but I want to say something anyway." The noise in the auditorium died down as people strained to hear him. "A week ago, I made a choice to help someone who needed help. I didn't think about it in terms of consequences or complications. I just saw another person in trouble and decided not to walk away. That choice almost destroyed my life. It cost me my job, my reputation, my relationship with my daughter. It turned me into a villain in a story I didn't write and couldn't control." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm standing here today because Ms. Whitmore decided that truth mattered more than convenience, because she chose integrity over institutional protection, because she refused to let the easy answer be the final answer. I'm grateful for that. More grateful than I can express." Evan's eyes moved across the crowd, making contact, refusing to let anyone hide. "But I need you to understand something. What happened to me could happen to anyone. Any of you could be one photograph, one rumor, one bad assumption away from this. And when that happens, I hope you remember how it felt to watch this. I hope you remember that truth matters, that evidence matters, that people deserve better than trial by gossip." He stepped back from the microphone, and this time the applause was genuine, not universal, but real. People standing, some crying, many looking ashamed. Lena returned to the podium for final remarks. "This meeting is concluded. Please return to your departments, and please remember what you learned here today." The audience began filing out, conversations erupting in hushed but intense tones. Evan remained on stage watching them go, feeling like he'd just survived something that should have killed him, but somehow hadn't. When the auditorium was mostly empty, Lena turned to him. "That was good. What you said. It was true. Truth seems to be your specialty." So she smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Welcome to the executive team, Director Carter. Your office will be ready by tomorrow morning." "I don't know the first thing about being a director. You know what integrity looks like. You know what happens when systems fail people. That's more qualification than most executives bring to their positions." Lena's expression grew serious. "I meant what I said up there. I want you to build something that makes sure this never happens again. Whatever resources you need, whatever authority you require, it's yours." Evan nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility settling onto shoulders that had spent a week carrying shame they didn't deserve. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "Why did you wait? You could have stopped this on day one. Why let it go on for a week?" Lena's smile faded. "Because I was scared. Because powerful people told me that protecting you would damage the company. Because I was more worried about board meetings and shareholder confidence than about the man who'd protected me when I was vulnerable." She met his eyes. "I was wrong. And I'm sorry. That apology doesn't undo the damage, but it's all I have." "It's enough," Evan said quietly. "Thank you." They stood together on the empty stage, two people who'd been thrown into crisis by a single night and had somehow emerged on the other side changed, but not broken. Marcus appeared from the wings, grinning ear to ear. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. The looks on people's faces when she announced your promotion, I thought Henderson was going to have a heart attack." "Henderson's the one who started the predator comments," Lena said calmly. "He'll be having a very different kind of conversation with HR tomorrow." Marcus's grin widened. "I love everything about this. Evan, man, congratulations. You deserve this." "I deserved not to be destroyed in the first place." "True. But this is a pretty good consolation prize." Evan couldn't argue with that. A week ago, he'd been a corporate driver content with invisibility. Today, he was director of ethics and professional standards, with authority to reshape company culture. It was surreal, overwhelming, and slightly terrifying. It was also, he realized, exactly what he needed to be doing. "I should go home," Evan said. "Process this. Figure out what comes next." "Take the rest of the day," Lena said. "Come in tomorrow morning and we'll start building your department. For now, just breathe. You've earned that." Evan left the building through the main entrance this time, no longer slinking through service corridors or avoiding eye contact. People stared as he passed, but the quality of the stares had changed. No more judgment or contempt. Now it was curiosity, respect, and in many cases, shame. He made it to his car before his phone started ringing. Sarah. Evan, what the hell just happened? I'm getting messages from people saying you got promoted after being suspended? He laughed, the sound slightly unhinged. Yeah, that's accurate. Explain. Now. So he did, standing in the parking garage, recounting the entire meeting while Sarah listened with increasingly audible shock. She showed the footage to everyone? Sarah asked when he finished. Every angle, every moment, made them watch the truth they'd ignored. Wow, that's actually amazing. Sarah paused. Emma's going to be so proud when I tell her. Evan's throat tightened. I can see her this weekend? You can see her tonight if you want. I'll text you. And Evan? Yeah? I'm sorry for doubting you, even for a second. You've always been exactly who you claim to be, and I should have known that. It's okay. It's not, but thank you for saying so. The call ended. Evan sat in his car, staring at nothing, feeling the accumulated tension of the past week finally beginning to release. He'd survived. More than survived. He'd been vindicated, promoted, given a platform to create change. But the part that mattered most was that he'd get to see Emma tonight, that his daughter would know the truth, that the story she'd been hearing at school would be replaced by reality. Everything else was secondary to that. Evan drove home slowly, letting the weight of the morning settle into something he could carry. The city looked different now, less hostile, less condemning. Or maybe he looked different. Maybe surviving something that should have destroyed you changed how you saw everything else. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Carter, this is Amanda Cross. Miss Whitmore asked me to send you some preliminary materials about your new role. Also, she wanted me to tell you that your salary has been adjusted to match executive-level compensation. You'll receive the details tomorrow. Evan read the message 3 times. Executive-level compensation. He'd gone from barely making rent to financial stability in the space of 2 hours. He should feel elated. Instead, he just felt the strange vertigo of watching your entire life transform in ways you never anticipated and weren't sure you deserved. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the people who deserved power were the ones who never sought it, who accepted it reluctantly, who understood the weight of responsibility because they'd experienced firsthand what happened when that responsibility was abandoned. Evan parked in front of his apartment building and sat for a moment before going inside. Tomorrow he'd start building something new. A department dedicated to ensuring truth mattered, evidence mattered, people mattered more than convenient narratives. Tonight, he'd see his daughter and begin repairing the damage that silence had caused. It wasn't a perfect ending. The past week had left scars that would take time to heal. But it was a beginning, and after everything that had happened, a beginning felt like enough. Emma arrived at Evan's apartment at 6:47 p.m. with the kind of explosive energy that only 7-year-olds could generate after being separated from a beloved parent for longer than expected. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him the moment Sarah opened the car door, her backpack flying off one shoulder, her curls bouncing with the force of her momentum. "Mom said you're a director now. What's a director? Is it like a movie director? Are you going to make movies?" Evan caught her mid-leap, lifting her into a hug that felt like oxygen after a week of suffocating. "Not that kind of director, volcano girl. I'm going to help make sure people at my company treat each other fairly." "Oh." Emma considered this, her face scrunched in concentration. "That sounds boring." Probably will be sometimes." "But you're not in trouble anymore?" Evan set her down gently, kneeling so they were eye level. "No, sweetheart, I'm not in trouble. I never was, actually. Some people made a mistake about what happened, but it got fixed today. Tommy Brennan's mom said you did something bad." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper, like she was sharing a secret. "But I told her she was wrong because you never do bad things." Evan's chest tightened. "Thank you for defending me." "Is Tommy's mom going to apologize?" "I don't know. Maybe." "She should. Mrs. Chen says when you're wrong about something, you should say sorry." Emma grabbed his hand and started pulling him toward his apartment. "Can we have pizza? Mom said I could ask." "Pizza sounds perfect." Sarah lingered by her car, watching the exchange with an expression that mixed relief and lingering guilt. Evan caught her eye and nodded. A silent communication that meant they were okay, that he understood, that the important thing was moving forward. She nodded back and drove away. The evening unfolded with the kind of ordinary joy that felt extraordinary after the week Evan had endured. They ordered pizza, extra cheese for Emma, pepperoni for him. They watched a nature documentary about volcanoes because Emma was still obsessed, and Evan found her enthusiasm infectious. They built a blanket fort in the living room that violated several principles of structural engineering, but held together through force of will and strategic pillow placement. At 8:30 p.m., as Emma was brushing her teeth in preparation for the sleepover Sarah had approved via text, Evan's phone rang. Lena. He stepped into the hallway outside his apartment to take the call. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Lena said. "My daughter's here, but it's fine. What's up?" "I wanted to check in, see how you're processing everything." Evan leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It hasn't fully hit yet. This morning I was suspended and unemployed. Tonight I'm an executive with a department to build. It's surreal." "I imagine it is." Lena paused. "I also wanted to apologize again. More personally this time, without the performance of a company meeting. What I did, staying silent while you suffered, that was unforgivable. You fixed it. That doesn't erase the damage. You lost a week of your life, time with your daughter, your sense of security. I can't give those things back." Evan closed his eyes. "No, but you can help me make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. That matters more than perfect justice for what already happened. You're remarkably gracious about this. I'm too tired to hold grudges. And honestly, Ms. Whitmore, Lena, please. I think we're past formalities." "Lena," Evan corrected, "what you did today took courage. You could have handled this quietly, cleared my name through internal channels, avoided the spectacle. Instead, you made everyone face what they'd done. That wasn't just about fixing my situation. That was about changing the culture. That was about doing what I should have done from the beginning. Better late than never." Lena was quiet for a moment. "Your daughter's name is Emma?" "Yeah, 7 years old, obsessed with volcanoes and asking approximately 9 million questions per hour." "Sounds exhausting." "It's the best kind of exhausting." Evan smiled despite himself. "She's why I stayed that night, you know. When I saw you struggling, I kept thinking about what I'd want someone to do if it was her in 20 years, what kind of person I'd hope would be around to make sure she got home safely. So you treated me the way you'd want someone to treat your daughter. I treated you like a human being who needed help. That's all it was." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not used to people like you, Evan. People who do the right thing because it's right, not because of what they'll gain from it. It's refreshing and slightly overwhelming. People like me are everywhere. You just have to look past the ones who are performing for advancement." "Fair point." Lena's tone shifted, becoming more businesslike. "Tomorrow morning, 8:00 a.m., my office. We'll start mapping out your department, budget, personnel needs, reporting structures. Come prepared with ideas. I've never built a department from scratch. Neither have most people on their first day as director. You'll figure it out." Her voice softened slightly. "And Evan, thank you for everything, including your willingness to believe that people can change when given reason to." The call ended before Evan could respond. He stood in the hallway for a moment, processing the strangeness of his new reality. 24 hours ago, Lena Whitmore had been an untouchable CEO who barely acknowledged his existence. Now she was calling him at 8:30 p.m. to check on his emotional state and thank him for basic decency. The world had tilted on its axis, and everything familiar had become foreign. "Daddy?" Emma's voice came from inside the apartment. "The fort's collapsing." Evan pushed off the wall and went to save their architectural disaster, grateful for the grounding force of his daughter's presence. Whatever complexity awaited him tomorrow, tonight he had pizza and blanket forts and a 7-year-old who still believed her father could fix anything. That was enough. The next morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of autumn day where the air felt sharp and the sunlight seemed more genuine than usual. Evan dropped Emma at school, endured her enthusiastic goodbye that involved 3 separate hugs and a detailed explanation of her science project to 2 of her classmates, then drove to Sterling and Cross with the surreal awareness that he was about to walk into his own office on the executive floor. The building looked the same as it had yesterday, but Evan's relationship to it had fundamentally changed. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't furniture with a pulse. He was director of ethics and professional standards, whatever that meant, and people would be watching to see if he deserved the position or if Lena's promotion had been guilt-driven impulse rather than strategic decision. Security nodded at him with new respect. The elevator to the executive floor required credentials he'd received via email at 6:00 a.m. The hallway was all polished wood and subtle lighting designed to communicate power through expensive minimalism. Evan found his office 3 doors down from Lena's, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that probably cost more than his car, and absolutely no personal touches because he'd been promoted approximately 16 hours ago. Amanda Cross was waiting inside, perfectly professional in a way that suggested she'd been managing executive chaos for decades, and found all of it vaguely amusing. "Good morning, Director Carter. I've taken the liberty of setting up your computer credentials, email access, and calendar. You have a standing 8:00 a.m. meeting with Ms. Whitmore every Tuesday and Thursday. Your first departmental budget meeting is Friday at 10:00 a.m. with finance. And you have approximately 67 emails waiting for you, most of which are either congratulatory or from people trying to preemptively apologize for their behavior last week." Evan stared at her. "How long have you been here?" "Since 6:30. Ms. Whitmore likes to start early." Amanda smiled slightly. "You'll want coffee. The executive break room is 2 doors down. I recommend the dark roast. The medium blend tastes like corporate ambition and disappointment." "Thank you. One more thing." Amanda's expression grew more serious. "People will be watching you very closely. Some will want you to fail because your promotion makes them uncomfortable. Others will want you to succeed because they're genuinely inspired by what happened yesterday. Navigate carefully. Politics up here are different than what you're used to." Evan nodded slowly. "I appreciate the warning. Good luck, Director." She left, and Evan stood alone in his new office, looking out at the city skyline and trying to process the magnitude of the change that had occurred. A week ago, he'd been worried about making rent. Today, he was expected to build a department that would reshape company culture. His computer chimed with a calendar reminder. Meeting with Whitmore in 5 minutes. Evan grabbed a notebook he'd bought on the way to work, college-ruled, spiral-bound, completely inadequate for executive strategizing, but familiar in a way that felt grounding, and walked to Lena's office. The door was open. Lena sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of very expensive wood, reviewing documents with the kind of focused intensity that had probably terrified subordinates for years. She looked up when Evan knocked. "Come in. Close the door." Evan obeyed, taking a seat in one of the chairs facing her desk. The office was larger than his apartment, decorated with the same aggressive minimalism that characterized the entire executive floor. A few personal touches, photographs from industry events, a plant that looked professionally maintained, awards that probably meant something important to people who cared about awards. "How are you settling in?" Lena asked. "Still figuring out where the bathroom is." She smiled. "Amanda can help with that. Let's talk about your department." For the next 90 minutes, they mapped out what would become the Ethics and Professional Standards Division. Lena asked questions. Evan provided answers drawn from his experience being on the receiving end of failed systems. What would have helped during his investigation? What would have prevented the situation from escalating? What structural changes could ensure evidence mattered more than rumor? "You'll need staff," Lena said, making notes. "I'm thinking 3 people initially, an investigator with actual training, an HR liaison who understands legal compliance, and an analyst who can track patterns in complaints and issues." "That sounds expensive." "It is. I don't care. This is important." Lena looked up from her notes. "I want you to have autonomy, real authority, not decorative power. If you identify a problem, you have my backing to fix it, even if it makes people uncomfortable." "Even if those people are executives?" "Especially if they're executives. We need accountability at every level, or this is just theater." Evan wrote that down, aware that she was handing him tools that could make him powerful enemies. What if I make mistakes? Then you'll learn from them. I'm not expecting perfection, Evan. I'm expecting integrity and genuine effort. Those are rarer than competence. They worked through budget projections, reporting structures, and the political realities of trying to change culture in an organization that had operated the same way for 20 years. Lena was blunt about the challenges: resistance from people who benefited from the old system, skepticism from employees who'd learned not to trust HR, board members who'd see this as expensive window dressing. You'll face pushback, she said, constant, exhausting pushback from people who think what happened to you was an acceptable cost of doing business. How do I handle that? By being exactly who you are, by refusing to compromise on the principle that people deserve dignity and fair treatment, by remembering that this isn't about winning political battles. It's about creating systems that protect the next person who finds themselves in your situation. Evan nodded slowly. I can do that. I know you can. That's why you're here. The meeting ended with action items, deadlines, and the vague sense that Evan had just been handed responsibility for something much larger than he'd initially understood. He returned to his office and spent the next 3 hours responding to emails, most of which fell into predictable categories. The genuine congratulations from people like Marcus who'd believed in him from the start, the cautious well wishes from people hedging their bets, the transparently insincere messages from people who'd participated in destroying him and were now desperate to avoid consequences, and the handful of honest apologies from people who seemed genuinely ashamed of their behavior. One email stood out, from Jennifer Ross, the dispatcher who'd gone cold the morning after the scandal broke. Director Carter, I owe you an apology. I saw the photo, heard the rumors, and assumed the worst without asking questions or demanding evidence. I participated in gossip that destroyed your reputation, and I'm ashamed of that. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry and I'm trying to be better. If there's anything I can do to help your new department, please let me know. Jen. Evan read it twice, then wrote back. Jen, I appreciate your honesty. We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them. I'll definitely reach out about the department. Your perspective would be valuable. Thank you for this. Evan. He sent similar responses to the dozen other genuine apologies, filed away the insincere ones without comment, and tried not to think about the people who'd said nothing at all, the ones who'd participated in his destruction and felt no need to acknowledge it. At 2:30 p.m., Patricia Webb appeared in his doorway. Evan looked up from his computer, surprised. They hadn't spoken since the all-staff meeting, and her expression suggested this conversation wasn't going to be comfortable. Director Carter, do you have a moment? Of course. Come in. Patricia entered slowly, closing the door behind her. She looked older than Evan remembered, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She sat in the chair across from his desk without waiting for invitation. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. A significant one. Evan waited. I conducted a sham investigation, Patricia continued, her voice tight with something between anger and shame. I collected evidence that supported the narrative I'd already decided was true. I ignored context, dismissed your explanations, and allowed company politics to dictate my conclusions. I failed you professionally, and I failed my own standards ethically. Why are you telling me this? Because Ms. Whitmore gave me a choice: resign quietly or face formal review for professional misconduct. I chose review, which means I need to be honest about what I did wrong. Patricia met his eyes. You deserve better. Every employee deserves better, and I'm sorry. Evan studied her, trying to gauge sincerity beneath professional composure. What happens now? Now I spend the next 3 months under performance review reporting to you about how HR handles investigations. Miss Whitmore thinks I can learn to do better. I'm not sure she's right, but I'm going to try. That must be difficult. It's humiliating. It's also necessary. Patricia stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I think your promotion was the right choice. Not because of what happened to you, but because you understand something most executives don't. That power without accountability destroys everything it touches. She left before Evan could respond. He sat alone in his office, processing the strangeness of having Patricia Webb, who'd been an instrument of his persecution, now reporting to him about her own failures. The symmetry was almost poetic. Almost. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, introductions to executives who ranged from genuinely welcoming to obviously threatened, and the slow realization that his new role came with political complexity he hadn't anticipated. People watched him differently now, some with respect, some with suspicion, many with the calculating assessment of those trying to determine whether he'd be useful or dangerous to their own agendas. By 5:30 p.m., Evan was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical labor and everything to do with navigating social dynamics that felt like advanced calculus conducted in a foreign language. He was packing up to leave when Lana appeared in his doorway. "Surviving your first day?" she asked. "Define surviving." "Still employed and not hiding under your desk in fetal position." "Then, yes, barely," Lena smiled. "It gets easier. Or at least you get better at pretending it's easy, which amounts to the same thing." She leaned against the door frame, her usual professional armor relaxed slightly. "I wanted to tell you something before you leave." "Okay." "What you're doing, building this department, accepting this responsibility, it matters. Not just for you, but for every person who works here. You're creating accountability where there was none. You're making it harder for people to be cruel without consequences. That's revolutionary in corporate environments." "I'm just trying to do the right thing." "That's exactly why it's revolutionary." Lena's expression grew more serious. "There will be days when this feels impossible, when the resistance is overwhelming and the progress feels non-existent. On those days, remember why you're here. Remember that you're preventing what happened to you from happening to someone else." Evan nodded slowly. "Thank you for the vote of confidence." "You've earned it." Lena straightened. "Go home. See your daughter. Tomorrow, we start the real work." Evan drove home as the sun set over the city, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. His phone showed 3 missed calls from his mother, who'd apparently heard about his promotion from his sister, who'd heard about it from a friend who worked in corporate finance, and a text from Emma consisting entirely of volcano emojis, and the message, "Dinner with you tomorrow?" He texted back confirmation, called his mother to endure 20 minutes of pride mixed with confusion about what exactly a director of ethics did, and finally collapsed onto his couch with the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from using mental muscles he'd never had to exercise before. His apartment was quiet, small, unchanged by the transformation his life had undergone. Same furniture, same kitchen with temperamental appliances, same bathroom with questionable plumbing. But sitting here now felt different, like he was visiting a previous version of himself rather than inhabiting his actual life. Evan pulled out his notebook and started writing. Not official notes or strategic plans, but personal reflections on what had happened over the past 8 days. The destruction, the vindication, the strange journey from invisible driver to executive authority. He wrote about fear and anger and the peculiar loneliness of being judged by people who'd never bothered to know him. But he also wrote about hope, about the possibility that systems could change, that culture could evolve, that doing the right thing could matter even when it cost everything. Somewhere in the middle of the 3rd page, his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Carter, this is Derek Hutchins." Evan's hand tightened on the phone. Derek Hutchins, the events manager who'd posted the first photo, who'd started the cascade of destruction, who'd disappeared from company systems when questions started being asked. "I'm listening. I wanted to apologize and explain, if you'll let me." "Go ahead." Derek's voice was strained, nervous. "I was set up. Someone sent me that photo with instructions to post it to the company chat. Said it was newsworthy, that people deserved to know what was happening with senior leadership. I was stupid enough to believe them." "Who sent it?" "I don't know. Burner email account, untraceable. By the time I realized I'd been used to start something ugly, it was too late to take it back." Derek paused. "I'm not making excuses. I should have verified the information. I should have asked questions. I didn't, and I'm sorry." Evan was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Ms. Whitmore told me I could either explain myself to you directly or face legal action for defamation. I'm choosing explanation." "Who do you think sent you the photo?" "I have theories, but no proof. Someone who wanted to damage Ms. Whitmore's reputation or someone who had a problem with you specifically. Corporate politics are complicated. That's an understatement. I know my apology doesn't fix anything, Derek said quietly, but for what it's worth, I'm genuinely sorry. And if you need anything from me for your investigation into how this happened, I'll cooperate fully. The call ended. Evan sat in the dark, thinking about conspiracy and coincidence, about the possibility that his suffering had been orchestrated rather than organic. It didn't change what had happened, but it added layers of complexity he wasn't sure he wanted to explore. Tomorrow, he'd ask Lena about it. Tomorrow, he'd start digging into how a single photo had spread so efficiently through company systems. Tomorrow, he'd begin the work of understanding not just what had happened, but why. Tonight, he just wanted to sleep. Evan set his phone aside, closed his notebook, and went to bed with the windows open and the city sounds filtering through like white noise. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives, unaware that a man they'd tried to destroy was now building systems to protect them from similar destruction. The irony wasn't lost on him, but neither was the opportunity. 3 months later, Evan sat in his office reviewing incident reports that would have been buried 6 months ago and marveled at how quickly the impossible could become routine. The Ethics and Professional Standards Department now had a full staff of 5 people, dedicated office space, and a growing reputation as the place employees went when HR failed them. Evan had hired carefully a former federal investigator named Rachel Kim, who approached every case with the thoroughness of someone who'd built careers on finding truth, an HR compliance specialist named James Morton, who knew every regulation and loophole, and 2 analysts who tracked patterns in workplace complaints with the kind of obsessive attention to detail that revealed systemic problems before they became crises. Together, they'd processed 47 cases in 12 weeks. Some were simple misunderstandings that required mediation rather than investigation. Others revealed deeper problems. Managers who'd been creating hostile environments for years, HR practices that protected the company while sacrificing employees, patterns of behavior that had been normalized simply because no one with authority had bothered to question them. Evan's department had become exactly what Lena had envisioned, a functional check on institutional failure, a place where truth mattered more than politics. But success came with complications. The knock on his door at 4:17 p.m. was sharp and aggressive. Evan looked up to find Richard Castellano, Senior Vice President of Operations, standing in his doorway, radiating the kind of barely contained fury that suggested this conversation was about to become difficult. "Director Carter, we need to talk." Evan gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Come in." Richard entered but didn't sit. Instead, he stood with his arms crossed, his posture communicating barely restrained hostility. "Your department just issued a formal reprimand against one of my managers. Care to explain that?" Marcus Chen filed a complaint about discriminatory treatment and assignment distribution. We investigated, found the complaint substantiated by documentation and witness testimony, and issued appropriate disciplinary action. Is there a specific concern about our findings? My concern is that you're undermining my authority. I've managed that department for 8 years without issues. You've managed that department for 8 years without anyone feeling safe enough to report issues, Evan corrected quietly. There's a difference. Richard's face flushed. You've been in this position for 3 months. You think that gives you the right to second-guess people who've been leading teams since before you learned to drive? I think it gives me the responsibility to ensure all employees are treated fairly, regardless of who's violating that principle. But this is exactly what people warned me about, that you'd use this position to settle scores, to punish anyone who didn't support you during your little scandal. Evan kept his expression neutral, though the accusation stung more than he wanted to admit. The manager in question participated in spreading rumors about me last fall. That's noted in my disclosure statement, which was reviewed by 3 separate parties to ensure there was no conflict of interest. The investigation was conducted by Rachel Kim without my direct involvement. The findings stand on their own merit. Convenient that your supposed objectivity still results in my people getting punished. Your people violated company policy. If you have evidence to the contrary, present it and we'll review our findings. Otherwise, the reprimand stands. Richard leaned forward, planting his hands on Evan's desk. You're making enemies, Carter, powerful ones. This crusade of yours won't last forever. It's It's not a crusade, it's my job. Keep telling yourself that. See how long Whitmore protects you when board members start asking why operations are being disrupted by someone who was driving cars a year ago. Richard left before Evan could respond, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Evan sat in silence for a moment, processing the threat that had been delivered with corporate politeness masking genuine menace. Richard was right about one thing. Evan was making enemies. Every case they took, every finding they issued, every time they held someone accountable, it created friction with people who preferred the old system where power insulated you from consequences. His phone buzzed. Lena. My office. Now. Evan walked down the hall, wondering if Richard had already escalated this to the CEO level, if 3 months of building something meaningful was about to collapse because he'd had the audacity to enforce standards against the wrong person. Lena's door was open. She was standing at her window looking out at the city, her posture tense in a way that suggested this conversation would be significant. Close the door, she said without turning around. Evan obeyed, taking his usual seat and waiting for whatever was coming. Lena turned to face him, and her expression was complicated, pride mixed with concern, determination shadowed by frustration. Richard Castellano just called me. He's unhappy about the reprimand against his manager. I know. He stopped by my office to make that very clear. Did he threaten you? Implied that I was making powerful enemies and suggested my protection wouldn't last forever. Lena's jaw tightened. That's not acceptable. I'll be addressing it with him directly. Is that why you called me here? No, I called you here because the board met this morning, and your department was a major topic of discussion. Evan's stomach dropped. Let me guess, they want it shut down. Some of them do. They think we're creating unnecessary conflict, that your approach is too aggressive, that the costs outweigh the benefits. Lena sat down behind her desk. They also think you're using the position to target people who wronged you personally. That's not true. I know it's not true. Your disclosure protocols and investigation processes are specifically designed to prevent that. But perception matters, especially at the board level. So what happens now? Lena leaned back in her chair, studying him with the kind of intensity that suggested she was making calculations that would affect more than just this conversation. Now I tell you something I probably should have mentioned 3 months ago. When I created your position, I did it without board approval. I used emergency authority that's technically reserved for crisis management, and I've been defending that decision in every board meeting since. Evan processed this slowly. You went around the board to promote me. I did what needed to be done. But it means your department exists on more fragile ground than you realized. If the board decides I overstepped my authority, they can dissolve the entire division. When will they decide? Next board meeting, 3 weeks from now. Lena's expression softened slightly. I need you to understand something, Evan. I believe in what you're building. I think it's transforming our culture in ways that will make us stronger long term. But belief isn't enough when you're facing people who care more about quarterly earnings than workplace dignity. What do you need from me? Prepare a presentation. Document every case you've handled, every policy you've improved, every metric that shows positive change. Make it undeniable that your department adds value. And be ready to defend your work against people who will be looking for any excuse to shut you down. Evan nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility settling heavier on shoulders that had already been carrying more than he'd expected. And if they vote to dissolve the department anyway, then I'll have to decide how hard I want to fight, and whether fighting will accomplish anything beyond damaging my own position to the point where I can't protect anyone. The honesty was brutal but appreciated. Lena wasn't promising unconditional support or guaranteed victory. She was being realistic about power and politics and the limits of what even a CEO could accomplish when boards decided to assert their authority. 3 weeks, Evan said. I'll be ready. He spent the next 17 days building the most comprehensive defense of his department's existence that he could construct. Rachel helped compile case files, sanitized for confidentiality, but detailed enough to show patterns. James pulled together policy improvements and compliance metrics. The analysts created visualizations showing reduction in workplace complaints, faster resolution times, increased employee satisfaction scores. Evan worked late every night, often not leaving the office until 9 o'clock or 10 p.m., then going home to refine presentations and rehearse arguments for an audience that had already decided he was a problem rather than a solution. Emma noticed the change during their weekends together. "You're tired all the time now," she said one Saturday afternoon as they walked through the park near his apartment. "Is work bad again?" "Work's not bad, sweetheart. Just busy." "Mom says you have an important meeting soon." "I do. Some people need to be convinced that my job matters." Emma stopped walking and looked up at him with the kind of serious expression that 7-year-olds shouldn't have to master. "Does it matter? Your job?" "I think so. I help make sure people are treated fairly at work." "Then the people at your meeting are wrong if they don't think that's important." Emma grabbed his hand and resumed walking with the kind of confidence that came from not yet understanding how complicated the world could be. "You should tell them they're wrong." "It's not quite that simple." "Why not? If something's true, it's true. Mrs. Chen says facts don't change just because people don't like them." Evan smiled despite the exhaustion pressing down on him. "Mrs. Chen sounds very wise." "She is. She also says you should always try your best, even when things are hard, because that's how you know you're brave." "I'll remember that." The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in the executive conference room that Evan had only seen from the outside. He arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a tablet loaded with his presentation, a printed backup in case technology failed, and the kind of nervous energy that made his hands shake slightly despite his best efforts at composure. Lena was already there, along with 8 board members who ranged in age from mid-40s to late 70s, representing investment firms, industry veterans, and the kind of accumulated wealth that insulated you from the consequences ordinary people faced daily. "Director Carter," Lena said formally, "thank you for joining us. Please, have a seat." Evan sat at the end of the conference table, acutely aware that he was about to defend his entire professional existence to people who'd probably already made up their minds. Martin Breswick, the board chairman, spoke first. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from decades of making decisions that affected thousands of lives without losing sleep over it. "Director Carter, we've asked you here to discuss the Ethics and Professional Standards Department. Specifically, we have concerns about its cost, its approach, and whether it's creating value commensurate with its resource allocation." "I understand," Evan said. "I've prepared a comprehensive review of our first 3 months that I believe addresses those concerns." "Please proceed." Evan connected his tablet to the conference room display and began walking through the presentation he'd refined obsessively. Case statistics showing 47 investigations completed with average resolution time of 8.3 days compared to the previous HR average of 47 days. Employee satisfaction scores up 12% in departments where they'd intervened. Reduction in legal complaints filed against the company. Cost savings from early intervention preventing situations from escalating to litigation. The numbers were solid. The impact was measurable. The value was demonstrable. But Evan could see in their faces that numbers weren't the real issue. "These metrics are interesting," said Catherine Vance, a board member representing a major investment firm. "But they don't address our primary concern, which is that your department seems to be creating conflict rather than resolving it. We've heard from multiple executives that your investigations are disruptive, that your standards are unrealistic, that you're damaging relationships that have functioned adequately for years. With respect, Ms. Vance, relationships that require one party to tolerate mistreatment aren't functioning adequately. They're functioning to the benefit of people with power while harming people without it." That's a rather dramatic characterization. It's an accurate one. Every case we've investigated involved someone being treated unfairly by someone with more institutional authority. Our job is to correct that imbalance. Another board member, Thomas Green, leaned forward. "Your job, as we understand it, was to improve workplace culture. Instead, you seem to have appointed yourself as judge and jury over everyone from middle management to senior executives. That's not what we authorized when Ms. Whitmore created this position." "The board didn't authorize this position at all," Evan said quietly. "Ms. Whitmore created it using emergency authority because the existing systems had failed so catastrophically that an innocent employee nearly had his life destroyed by institutional negligence." The silence that followed was profound. "Are you referring to yourself?" Catherine asked. "Yes." I'm referring to the fact that I was investigated, suspended, and professionally destroyed based on photographs stripped of context and rumors accepted as fact. I'm referring to the week I spent watching 300 employees participate in my character assassination because no system existed to demand evidence before reaching conclusions. I'm referring to the structural failures that made all of that possible. Martin's expression was carefully neutral. And you think that experience qualifies you to oversee ethics for the entire company? I think it qualifies me to understand what happens when ethics become decorative rather than functional. When policies exist on paper but not in practice. When the path of least resistance is always protecting institutional interests over individual dignity. That's a rather cynical view of corporate culture, Thomas said. It's a realistic view based on direct experience. Evan paused, gathering his thoughts. I'm not here because I wanted power or advancement. I'm here because Ms. Whitmore recognized that someone who'd survived systemic failure might be uniquely positioned to prevent it from happening to others. And over the past 3 months, that's exactly what we've done. He pulled up a new slide showing specific case summaries, confidential details removed but patterns visible. An employee who'd been denied promotion repeatedly despite exceeding performance metrics. Investigation revealing bias in the review process, corrective action resulting in long overdue advancement. A team where assignments were distributed based on personal favoritism rather than capability, intervention creating transparent processes that improved both morale and productivity. A manager who'd been creating hostile environment for years finally held accountable after previous complaints were dismissed without investigation. These aren't abstractions, Evan said. These are real people whose working lives improved because someone finally cared enough to investigate their concerns thoroughly. That's the value we provide. Not just cost savings or risk management, but basic human dignity and professional context. Catherine exchanged glances with Martin. You're very passionate about this. Yes, because it matters. But passion doesn't always translate to sound business judgment. Your department has created friction with multiple senior executives. You've issued reprimands against people who've been with this company for decades. You've disrupted established working relationships. At some point, we have to ask whether the cost of that disruption exceeds the benefit. Evan felt something shift inside him. A recognition that he was about to either save his department or destroy his credibility, with no middle ground between the two outcomes. Let me ask you a question, he said, knowing he was taking a risk but unable to stop himself. What would have happened if Ms. Whitmore hadn't intervened in my case? If she'd followed the advice of her lawyers and PR consultants and stayed silent while the investigation ran its course? No one answered. I'll tell you what would have happened. HR would have concluded that my presence created liability. I would have been terminated quietly, probably with a settlement agreement requiring my silence. The company would have avoided scandal and moved on, and everyone would have believed I was guilty because that was the easier story to accept. Evan looked at each board member in turn. That's what happens when systems prioritize convenience over truth. When disruption is treated as worse than injustice. When maintaining comfortable relationships matters more than ensuring people are treated fairly. You're suggesting we should accept disruption as the price of ethics, Martin said. I'm suggesting that if ethics don't disrupt comfort, they're not actually ethics. They're just performance. The room fell silent again. Lena sat very still, her expression unreadable, letting Evan's words stand without reinforcement or contradiction. Thomas cleared his throat. Director Carter, your passion is evident, but this board has fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, not just employees. We need to consider return on investment, not just moral imperatives. Then consider this, Evan said. Every case we prevent from becoming litigation saves the company hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Every employee who stays because they're treated fairly rather than leaving for competitors saves recruitment and training costs. Every improvement in workplace culture reduces turnover, increases productivity, and protects the company's reputation. He pulled up a final slide showing projected cost savings over 5 years based on current intervention rates. The moral case is compelling, Evan continued, but the business case is equally strong. You can have both ethics and profitability. You just have to be willing to invest in systems that support both. The board members conferred quietly among themselves for several minutes. Evan sat silently, aware that Lena was watching him with something that looked like pride mixed with concern. Finally, Martin spoke. "Director Carter, please step outside. We'll deliberate and call you back." Evan left the conference room and stood in the hallway trying to breathe normally, while his future hung in balance, being weighed by people he'd never met until 20 minutes ago. His phone showed 3:47 p.m. Emma would be getting out of school soon. Sarah would pick her up, take her to gymnastics, feed her dinner, normal life continuing regardless of whether his professional life was about to implode. The conference room door opened. Lena stepped out, closing it behind her. "How do you think it went?" she asked quietly. "Honestly, I have no idea. Either I convinced them or I gave them everything they needed to justify shutting us down." "You were honest. That counts for something." "Does it? Or does honesty just make it easier for them to dismiss me as too idealistic for corporate reality?" Lena smiled slightly. "When I created your position, I told you I wanted someone who understood that integrity mattered more than politics. You just proved you're exactly that person. Whatever they decide, you should be proud of what you built." "I don't want to be proud of something that gets dismantled before it can make lasting change." "I know, but sometimes that's all we get. The satisfaction of knowing we tried, even if the system wasn't ready to change." The conference room door opened again. Martin gestured for them to return. Evan walked back inside, feeling like he was approaching judgment in a trial where the verdict had been decided before evidence was presented. He sat down, keeping his expression neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing fear, even though it was currently trying to claw its way out through his chest. Martin looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Director Carter, this board has serious concerns about your department's approach and the friction it's created within executive leadership." Here it comes, Evan thought. The careful corporate language that would dismantle 3 months of work while pretending it was a strategic decision rather than political calculation. "However," Martin continued, "we also recognize that the metrics you've presented show genuine value. More importantly, we acknowledge that the situation which led to your department's creation revealed significant failures in our existing systems." Evan's heart rate kicked up slightly. "Therefore, we've decided to approve continued operation of the Ethics and Professional Standards Department for an additional 12 months, with quarterly reviews to ensure ongoing value delivery. We're also approving increased budget allocation to expand your staff by 2 additional positions." If Evan blinked, certain he'd misheard. "You're approving expansion?" "We're approving a trial period," Catherine corrected. "You've made a compelling case that systemic change requires sustained effort. We're giving you the resources to prove that thesis. But understand, you'll be under intense scrutiny. Every case, every decision, every resource allocation will be reviewed. If the disruption exceeds the benefit, this authorization will be revoked." "I understand. Thank you." "Don't thank us yet," Thomas said. "You've just been given enough rope to either build something remarkable or hang yourself professionally. Use it wisely." The meeting concluded with procedural details and timeline discussions that Evan barely processed through the fog of relief and residual adrenaline. When he finally left the conference room, Lena walked with him back toward their offices. "That went better than I expected," she said. "Did you know they were going to approve it?" "No. I genuinely thought it could go either way." Lena stopped outside her office door. "What you said in there about disruption being necessary for real ethics, that resonated. You gave them permission to see this as an investment rather than a cost center. I just told them the truth. Which is why it worked." Lena paused. "You're going to face continued resistance. People like Richard Castellano aren't going to suddenly support you just because the board approved your budget. If anything, they'll work harder to undermine you." "I know." "Good, because the next 12 months will be harder than the last 3. You'll need to be strategic, not just principled. You'll need to build alliances, not just enforce standards. You'll need to prove that ethics and business success aren't mutually exclusive." "Any advice on how to do that?" Lena smiled. "Keep being exactly who you are. It's gotten you this far." That evening, Evan picked Emma up from Sarah's apartment and took her to their favorite pizza place to celebrate in the way that mattered most, sharing a meal with his daughter while she explained her latest science project with the kind of enthusiasm that made everything else feel manageable. "So we're building a model of the water cycle. Emma said through a mouthful of cheese. And I'm in charge of making the clouds because Mrs. Chen said I have good attention to detail. That sounds perfect for you. Did you win your meeting today? Evan smiled. Yeah, volcano girl. I won. I knew you would because you always try your best and that's what brave people do. Where did you learn to be so wise? I pay attention. Emma grinned, showing the gap where she'd lost a tooth the previous week. Also, Mrs. Chen tells us stuff, and I remember it. They finished dinner and drove home through city streets that felt different now, less threatening, less uncertain. Evan had survived another trial, earned another extension, bought more time to build something that might outlast his involvement. Over the following months, the Ethics and Professional Standards Department evolved from controversial experiment to accepted infrastructure. Evan hired 2 more investigators, expanded their case management systems, and began conducting proactive audits of company policies rather than just responding to complaints. The resistance didn't disappear. Richard Castellano remained hostile. Other executives continued to view oversight as threat rather than support. But the wins accumulated faster than the losses. They prevented a major lawsuit by identifying harassment patterns before they escalated. They improved retention in 3 departments by addressing systemic fairness issues. They created transparent promotion processes that reduced bias and increased employee trust. Small victories that added up to cultural transformation, one case at a time. Lena proved to be exactly the ally she'd promised, providing resources, defending decisions, running interference with board members who questioned specific interventions. Their working relationship deepened into something that resembled actual friendship, though both of them maintained professional boundaries that acknowledged the complexity of their respective positions. 6 months after the board meeting, Evan was reviewing quarterly metrics when Lena appeared in his doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Got a minute?" she asked. "For coffee. Always." She entered and set 1 cup on his desk, taking her usual seat across from him. "I wanted to tell you something before the all-staff announcement tomorrow." "Should I be worried?" "No, but it's significant." Lena took a sip of her coffee. "The board just approved a company-wide ethics training program based on your department's protocols, mandatory for all employees, including executives. It'll be the most comprehensive cultural intervention we've ever attempted." Evan set down his own coffee carefully. That's exactly what we've been recommending for months." "I know. It took time to convince them, but the data you've been collecting made it undeniable. We have proof that early intervention prevents bigger problems, that transparent processes improve outcomes, that accountability creates better culture." "When does this start?" 3 months. You'll be overseeing the development and implementation. It's going to be a massive project, training materials, assessment tools, follow-up protocols. But if we do it right, it changes everything. Evan leaned back in his chair, processing the magnitude of what she was describing. "This is what we've been working toward, systemic change instead of individual case management." "Exactly. And it's happening because you built something that proved itself valuable beyond doubt." Lena's expression grew more serious. "I also wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For the 100th time, probably, but it bears repeating. None of this would exist if I hadn't stayed silent when you needed me to speak. You turned my failure into something transformative, and I'm grateful for that, even though you never should have been in a position to need to. We've had this conversation before, and we'll probably have it again. Guilt doesn't evaporate just because time passes. Then let me say this one more time, too. You fixed it. You could have handled my vindication quietly, avoided the spectacle, protected your own image. Instead, you made it public, made it painful, made it matter. That took courage, and it changed everything." Lena smiled. "We make a good team, Director Carter." "Yes, we do." She stood to leave, then paused. "Are you bringing Emma to the company picnic next month?" "Planning on it. Why?" "Because she deserves to see what her father built, what his integrity created. 7-year-olds should know that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard." "I'll make sure she's there." The company picnic was held on a Saturday in late spring when the weather had finally committed to being warm without being oppressive. Sterling and Cross rented out a massive park, set up games and food stations, and created the kind of forced fun that companies specialized in, but Employees occasionally enjoyed despite themselves. Evan arrived with Emma, who immediately abandoned him in favor of the face painting station where volunteers were transforming children into butterflies and superheroes. He wandered through the crowd, aware that his role had changed from invisible driver to recognizable executive, that people greeted him by name now, that his presence meant something beyond basic functionality. Marcus found him near the volleyball courts. "Director Carter, fancy seeing you at a company event actually enjoying yourself." "Emma's here. I'm contractually obligated to enjoy myself." "She's great." Saw her explaining volcanic formation to 3 other kids like she's a geology professor. Evan laughed. "That sounds accurate." They stood together watching employees play volleyball with varying degrees of athletic competence, comfortable in the friendship that had survived everything that had tried to break it. "You know what's weird?" Marcus said. "A year ago, you were the guy everyone ignored. Now you're the guy everyone's either trying to impress or actively afraid of. That's a hell of a transformation." "I'm not trying to be intimidating." "You're not. But accountability is inherently intimidating to people who aren't used to experiencing it." Marcus grinned. "It's beautiful, honestly, watching executives squirm because they might actually face consequences for bad behavior. That's not the point of the department. I know, but it's a nice side benefit." Evan spotted Lena across the park, talking with a group of mid-level managers who looked both excited and terrified to have her attention. She caught his eye and raised her coffee cup in subtle salute. He raised his own in response. The afternoon unfolded in the kind of ordinary joy that made the previous year's trauma feel distant and surreal. Emma won a prize for best volcano drawing in the kids' art contest. Evan played cornhole with some of his department staff and lost spectacularly. Someone convinced Lena to participate in the 3-legged race, and she shocked everyone by being fiercely competitive despite her usual corporate reserve. As the sun started setting and families began packing up to leave, Emma found Evan sitting on a picnic bench watching the chaos wind down. "This was fun," she announced, climbing up next to him. "Your work people are nice." "I'm glad you think so. That lady, Ms. Whitmore, said I should be proud of you. She said you make the company better." "Ms. Whitmore is very kind." Emma leaned against his side, tired from a day of running around. "Are you happy now, Daddy? Like, really happy?" Evan considered the question seriously. A year ago, he'd been content with invisibility, satisfied with small stability, asking nothing more from life than the ability to pay rent and spend weekends with his daughter. Then everything had fallen apart and reassembled into something he'd never imagined possible. "Yeah, Volcano Girl. I'm really happy." "Good. Because you deserve to be happy. You're the best daddy, and you help people, and that's important." "You're pretty important, too." "I know. Mrs. Chen says knowing your own worth is the first step to success." Evan laughed and pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of sunscreen and grass stains and childhood innocence that he'd come dangerously close to losing time with. The next Monday morning, Evan arrived at his office to find a handwritten note on his desk, Lena's handwriting distinctive and precise. "Evan, thank you for everything you've built. Thank you for refusing to let one terrible week define your entire future. Thank you for turning my failure into your purpose. But mostly, thank you for proving that integrity isn't weakness and that doing the right thing can change everything. You've transformed this company in ways I couldn't have managed alone. I'm grateful to know you. I'm privileged to work with you, and I'm proud to call you a friend. Lena." Evan read it 3 times, then filed it carefully in his desk drawer next to Emma's latest volcano drawing and the newspaper article about his promotion that his mother had mailed him with approximately 17 exclamation points in the margins. Evidence that he'd survived, that he'd transformed, that one night's decision to help another human being had set in motion changes that rippled far beyond what he could have predicted. The work continued. Cases to investigate, policies to improve, people to protect from systems that had failed them the way systems had once failed him. It was exhausting and challenging and occasionally frustrating in ways that made Evan question whether he was actually qualified for the position he held. But it mattered. Every person whose complaint was taken seriously instead of dismissed. Every pattern identified before it became crisis. Every policy improved to prevent future harm. It all mattered in ways that accumulated into cultural transformation. 2 years after that night at the gala, Evan received notification that his department had been permanently established with full board approval and expanded authority. No more quarterly reviews. No more trial periods. The Ethics and Professional Standards Division was now fundamental infrastructure, as essential as HR or legal or finance. He called Lena to share the news. "I heard," she said. "Congratulations. You've officially graduated from experiment to institution. Couldn't have done it without your support." "You could have. You're far more capable than you give yourself credit for. But I'm glad I got to help." Lena paused. "Are you free for lunch today? I want to discuss the next phase." There's a next phase. There's always a next phase. That's how progress works. They met at a restaurant near the office, sitting at a corner table where they could talk without being overheard. Lena ordered salad, Evan ordered a sandwich, and they spent the first 10 minutes discussing Emma's latest science project before transitioning to business. "The board wants to expand your model to our other offices," Lena said. "We have locations in 6 cities. Each one needs the same infrastructure you've built here. That's a massive undertaking." "It is, but you've proven the concept works. Now we need to scale it." Lena met his eyes. "I'm offering you Senior Vice President of Ethics and Professional Standards, company-wide authority, budget to hire regional directors, platform to transform culture across every location we operate." Evan set down his sandwich, processing the offer. "That's a significant promotion. You've earned it, and more importantly, the company needs it. What you've built here is too valuable to limit to one location." "What about the people who'll resist?" Richard Castellano multiplied by 6 cities' worth of executives who see oversight as threat. "You'll handle them the same way you've handled resistance here, with data, integrity, and refusal to compromise on principles that matter." Lena smiled. "Besides, you'll have support. I'm not letting you do this alone." Evan thought about Emma, about the life he'd built, about the strange journey from invisible driver to senior executive, about how one night's decision had cascaded into transformation that kept expanding beyond what he'd imagined possible. "I accept," he said. "Good. We start planning next week." 6 months later, Evan stood in front of 200 employees at Sterling & Cross's Chicago office, delivering the same presentation he'd given in 5 other cities over the previous months. Explaining what ethics meant in practical terms, how to report concerns without fear of retaliation, why systems that protected people also protected the company. The faces changed, but the message remained consistent. Truth matters, evidence matters, dignity matters more than convenience. After the presentation, a young woman approached him nervously. She couldn't have been more than 25, dressed in business casual that suggested entry-level position, her expression cycling through determination and fear. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask about something." "You're not bothering me. What's going on?" "There's a situation in my department. My manager has been..." He makes comments about my appearance, about what I wear. Nothing that feels like harassment exactly, but it makes me uncomfortable and I don't know if it's worth reporting. Evan had heard variations of this story dozens of times. The uncertainty about whether discomfort justified action. The fear of being dismissed or punished for speaking up. The internalized doubt about whether their experience mattered enough to warrant attention. "It's worth reporting," he said firmly. "Discomfort in professional settings isn't something you should have to tolerate. And comments about appearance from a manager create power dynamics that are inherently problematic." "But what if I'm overreacting? What if everyone thinks I'm being too sensitive?" "What if you're not overreacting and this manager is creating an environment that violates company policy? What if you're not the only person experiencing this? What if your report prevents the situation from escalating into something worse?" The woman nodded slowly. "How do I report it?" "There's a confidential form on the company intranet, or you can contact my office directly. Either way, your concern will be investigated thoroughly, and you'll be protected from retaliation." "Thank you, I'll do that." She walked away, and Evan felt the familiar satisfaction of knowing that systems he'd built were working the way they should, making it possible for people to seek help without risking their livelihoods. That evening, he called Emma from his hotel room. "How's Chicago?" she asked, her voice tinny through the phone speaker. Cold, windy, kind of gray. Sounds sad. It's not sad, just different from home. How was school? Emma launched into a detailed explanation of her day that involved a substitute teacher, a fire drill, and some kind of drama with her friend Sophia that Evan couldn't quite follow, but nodded along to anyway. When she finished, she asked the question she'd been asking every night he was away. When are you coming home? Friday afternoon, just in time for our weekend together. Good. I miss you. I miss you too, Volcano Girl, more than you know. After they hung up, Evan stood at his hotel window looking out at the Chicago skyline and thinking about how far he'd traveled from that night 2 years ago. From invisible to influential, from powerless to positioned. From victim of systemic failure to architect of systemic change. But the part that mattered most wasn't the title or the authority or the platform. It was knowing that somewhere in this city, a young woman had just learned that her discomfort mattered, that reporting concerns wouldn't destroy her career, that systems existed to protect her instead of institutions that employed her. That was the real transformation. Not what had happened to Evan, but what was happening because of him. The ripple effects of choosing integrity over convenience, of building something that outlasted the circumstances that created it. 5 years after the gala, Sterling and Cross had ethics departments in 12 cities, mandatory training for all employees, and a reputation as an industry leader in workplace culture. Evan had been promoted twice more, now serving as Chief Ethics Officer with a seat on the executive leadership team. His department had investigated over 300 cases, prevented countless others through proactive intervention, and fundamentally changed how the company approached employee relations. Emma was 12 now, still asking 800 questions per hour, but adding social dynamics and preteen complexity to her repertoire. Sarah had remarried, a good guy who treated Emma well and didn't seem threatened by Evan's continued presence in his daughter's life. His mother still sent newspaper clippings about his achievements with extensive margin notes. Marcus had been promoted to Transportation Services Manager and took every opportunity to remind people that he'd believed in Evan from the beginning. And Lena had become genuinely one of his closest friends, not just a professional ally, but someone he trusted, respected, and genuinely enjoyed spending time with outside of work contexts. On the 5-year anniversary of that night, Lena invited Evan to dinner at a restaurant far nicer than anywhere he would have chosen himself. "Are we celebrating something?" he asked as they were seated. Survival. Growth. The fact that we turned one terrible night into something that's helped hundreds of people. Lena smiled. That seems worth acknowledging. They ordered food and spent the meal talking about everything except work. Emma's latest academic achievements, Lena's decision to finally take a real vacation, the absurdity of getting older and realizing that wisdom was mostly just accumulated mistakes you'd learned not to repeat. Over dessert, Lena grew more serious. I've been thinking about that night a lot lately, about the choices we both made, about how easily everything could have gone differently. What do you mean? If you'd left me alone in that apartment, I probably would have been fine. Hangover, embarrassment, but fine. But you stayed because you thought it was the right thing to do, and that choice almost destroyed you. It also led to everything that came after, the department, the cultural change, all of it. I know, but it shouldn't have required you to suffer first. You shouldn't have had to be victimized by broken systems before you were given authority to fix them. Evan considered this. Maybe, but I'm not sure I would have understood what needed fixing if I hadn't experienced it firsthand. Sometimes you have to break before you can build. That's a very philosophical take on trauma. I've had 5 years to process it. Evan set down his fork. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course. During that week when everything was falling apart, when the whole company had decided I was guilty and my life was imploding, there were moments when I understood why people give up, when the gap between truth and perception felt so insurmountable that fighting seemed pointless. Lena's expression grew pained. Evan, let me finish. Those moments taught me something crucial about what people experience when systems fail them. The exhaustion, the hopelessness, the way institutions can grind you down until you stop believing that truth matters or justice is possible. He met her eyes. That understanding is what makes me good at this job, because I remember what it feels like to be powerless, and I refuse to let anyone else experience that if I can prevent it. You turned your worst experience into your greatest strength. I turned your failure into my purpose. We both got something valuable from something terrible." Evan smiled slightly. "That's not redemption exactly, but it's something close." They finished dinner and walked out into the cool evening air, standing on the sidewalk outside the restaurant while the city moved around them with the indifferent energy of millions of people living their own complicated lives. "Thank you," Lena said quietly, "for staying that night, for building what you've built, for being exactly who you are, even when the world tried to punish you for it. Thank you for finally speaking up, for making the truth matter, for giving me the platform to turn survival into transformation." They parted ways with a hug that felt like acknowledgement of everything they'd been through together, everything they'd built, everything that had changed because one person chose kindness and another finally chose courage. Evan drove home through familiar streets, past the apartment where he'd lived when he was invisible, past Sterling and Cross headquarters where he'd once been just a driver, to his current home in a neighborhood that actually matched his income level now. He parked and sat in the car for a moment, looking up at the building that represented stability and success and all the ordinary achievements he'd once assumed would never be his. His phone buzzed, a text from Emma sent from Sarah's house where she was staying this week. "Love you, Daddy. See you Friday. Don't forget we're going to the Science Museum for the new geology exhibit." Evan smiled and texted back confirmation, then sat in the quiet darkness thinking about volcanoes and ethics departments and 7-year-olds who'd grown into 12-year-olds who still believed her father could accomplish anything if he tried hard enough. Some nights ruined lives, others redefined them. That night 5 years ago had done both, and Evan had spent every day since proving that surviving destruction could be the first step toward building something that mattered more than the circumstances that tried to break you. He got out of the car and went inside, carrying with him the weight of responsibility and the lightness of purpose, knowing that tomorrow he'd wake up and continue the work that had transformed from personal vindication into institutional change. It was enough, more than enough. It was exactly what he'd been meant to do all along. He just hadn't known it until one terrible night forced him to discover who he actually was beneath the invisibility he'd been hiding behind. And that discovery, painful as it had been, was the greatest gift that crisis had given him. The gift of knowing that doing the right thing always mattered, even when it cost everything. Especially when it cost everything, because that's when it mattered most.